Hey guys, welcome out to Revolution this morning. We're asking which TR to a critical text advocate talking with Mark Ward about the Textus Receptus. And so this is a Dwayne Green interview. So I'm examining this. So this is only just a few days ago on the 17th of February. This is the first of three that he did. So this only goes for about 20 minutes. And so that could stretch out for a couple of hours or whatever. But I'm just going to get straight into it, and we're going to answer some of these issues that come up. And so let's just go straight into it.
Hey YouTube, it's Dwayne here, and today we have another guest with us. That's right, we are continuing the discussion about the Textus Receptus. If you're taking a look at the marquee here, we have Dr. Mark Ward with us today, and we're going to continue the discussion about the Textus Receptus. Go ahead and say hello to everybody there, Dr. Ward.
Hello to everybody there, Dr. Ward.
Nice. I've been talking about the TR and the which TR question, probably seen the video, been talking to everybody about it. And so I want to get a fair perspective from both sides, one from the TR side, which TR, and then one from the critical text side, which TR. Obviously, you're not going to pick a TR, but just want to get your position on there. What do you think about that?
I have picked Erasmus's second TR edition as the perfect text. I'm just kidding, obviously. Maybe what you're asking me is...
Okay, so I just want to, just to clarify, the which TR thing is basically something that's been brought up because someone like James White and even D.A. Carson, anti-King James version preferred people, they lump people like Peter Ruckman, Sam Gipp, Gal Ripplinger. They lump everyone into the same pile. Okay, so it's like me going into young Earth creationism and saying, well, Jonathan Safadi's the same as Ken Hovind. And he would say, no, that they have even different bibliology, but it's like they would say, no, we disagree with each other. But if I just keep saying, no, they're the same, and you do see people doing that. People who are old Earth creationists and things like that, they will throw young Earth creationists all into the same bag, even if they have not had no influence on each other, or sometimes they've never even read the other guy's material. It's like you're part of that group. And this is just one of the lazy concepts that's come out of especially James White's book, where he's five King James version only groups. One of them is just your grandma reading the Bible, and another one has Zane Hodges in it, who's, might be a New King James guy, but no one who worked on the New King James was a Textus Receptus person. Doesn't give you much confidence that it's a TR Bible when none of them believe in a TR position. So James White in his book, he has the 5 different categories, and so he talks about, some of them they believe in the Greek text, some of them believe that it's sort of inspired. And then you hear people saying all this weird stuff like, some people believe it floated down on a cloud. And it's like, so who's saying that, But so someone like D.A. Waite in the Dean Burgon Society, they would be at loggerheads with someone like Ruckman, who would say that the English was superior to the Greek and all this sort of stuff. But many times it's actually... people being misrepresented, because what he was specifically saying was that there are readings in the King James that are not in the text of Beza. They're not, even when Scrivener, attempted his work in 1881 to create that Greek text that the King James translators never did, that they weren't commissioned to do. Ruckman just pointed out that there's differences. And he's like, so who do you go with, the King James or that? And realistically, someone like me, I'm like, well, I'll go with the King James reading. I believe that's the correct reading. And I believe Scrivener's should be amended to that, And so that's where it goes, okay, well, you're a King James only. And so the thing is, then, okay, you're a King James only, you're in a cult, apparently. Critical text people can believe that the Septuagint was the Bible that Jesus used. They believe that, the Septuagint back in those days was great. The apostles used it, Jesus used it. My understanding is that it is reverse engineered. The Greek church, after having a Greek New Testament, they started to work on an Old Testament, and they started copying and pasting, some of the quotes from the New Testament directly into the Old. And we can see where they've actually done it in the wrong place. They've copied and pasted the Greek New Testament into the Old Testament in the wrong place. If you have a good look at Genesis 48 and 49, you can see where that's clearly happened. So they were doing it because we can see where they've done mistakes with it. But so it gives the appearance that it was used. It gives the appearance that Jesus was quoting from this old Greek Bible. But people will usurp the Hebrew for a Septuagint reading. And they said the Septuagint is the early church was using this, the disciples used it, Jesus himself used it. It's a translation. And see, this is the hypocrisy of the critical text people. So I will get labeled King James only because I believe that the King James translators continued the work of Beza. They did their translation, but their Greek text that they formulated, they never printed it. Now, had they printed it, had they gone, okay, let's print that, there would be no difference between King James only position and TR position. There'd be none of this. But again, things are just divided up into there's so many different factions and things like that. But it's actually quite simple. Brilliant scholars worked on Greek texts. Were these Greek texts just to be read? No, they were to be translated. That's the whole deal. I mean, it's not like people were just sitting around going, yeah, let's just get these Bibles so we can all talk in Greek. Now, there were scholars doing that. We know the King James translators, some of them, especially people like John Boyce and Lancelot Andrews. These guys were just awesome in their polyglottery. But what you find is these texts are designed to be translated. So they go along with the translation. So to have the text of Beza, now Scribner made 191 changes in the Greek. This includes mostly phonetical things like Beelzebub or Beelzebul. Well, according to the translators, the rules to the translation, they were to keep common names the same. So Beelzebub, even though it's a Latin term, that stuck. That's what they call Beelzebub. They didn't call him Beelzebul, so they put that in the translation. And so they call Paul Paul, not Paulos, and things like that. So when you get rid of those, tiny little distinctions of, there's a word here that could have a smooth breathing or a rough breathing or a final noon or not a final noon. When you go through all that, you find that there's probably about 10% of the 190. So about 20 translatable differences between the text of Beza and the text of Scribner. And so when we look at the King James, we see there's 191 differences in the Greek between Beza and Scribner, but the only ones that are translatable into English, there's only about 20 of them. And so when we look at the King James, it just has these 20 tiny little differences. Now, they probably didn't feel like it was worth doing a whole new Greek text. Or it could be a stroke of genius where they're looking at other, the Latin church, they brought out their Latin Bible and that just became it, And so, the Greek Orthodox Bible, their whole thing is we've got the Bible and it's stable and all the rest of it. And so they have their Bible. So having an English Bible, unifying English people, it's like, well, that's the definitive one. Yeah, we could print a Greek one, but we want people to go to the English. And so that could have been a factor. But at the end of the day, Scribner attempted to do the Greek text that the King James guys never got around to doing or were never commissioned to do. And in 1881, he did that TR edition, which is what Trinitarian Bible Society used today. And that's the closest that we have. So that is very close. You probably, I would say, if I was to go through it with a fine-tooth comb, I'd probably find about 20 differences in the Greek. Now, that's different to the 20 differences from Beza. Oh, sorry, the 190 differences from Beza. But these are very small. And when it comes to closeness to the King James, Scribner's the closest, probably with maybe about 5 or 6 words that differ from the King James. And so then you have Beza, you've got about 20 words that are translatable that differ from the King James. And so um, it's like, seriously, these guys are making such a mountain. But when you get Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, these two shouldn't even be considered the same family. Basically, the Alexandrian family is just, let's get every variant reading and just clump them together. Let's get, I mean, Vaticanus and Sinaiticus are so corrupt. They have so many different variants. It's like, let's just get the ones with the most variants. I mean, Codex Beza is so different that it's like, they don't go with it. But for me, for a Textus Receptus person looking at these manuscripts, Vaticanus and Sinaiticus are just as corrupt as Codex Beza. They have so many errors in them, so many solecisms, so many uh, transcriptional errors. I mean, these things are just disgusting. They disagree just in the Gospels, as Herman Hoskia pointed out, 3,000 times just in the Gospels alone. Dean John William Burgon said it's easier to find a verse where they don't agree than where they agree. So we're looking at these two have been amalgamated to form a never seen before Greek text. Never seen before. They've amalgamated these two. So this is the son of Frankenstein, and it's like this horrible thing has just been pasted together with the help of Unitarians as well, who worked on Westcott Hort text. And then it's been carried through to Nestle Ayland 28. We have Nestle, we have Ayland, but we also have Carlo Martini and other heretics work on the text. But you don't find these guys ever really talking about that because it just seems too divisive or uncharitable, and these words just keep coming up, which sort of makes me gag a little bit. It's like, guys, just harden up a bit, like, I mean, let's talk like men here. We're talking about matters of eternity, heaven or hell. I mean, can't you just read Matthew 23? Jesus is calling people snakes, brood of vipers, you hypocrites, you this and that. And so if I see someone like Billy Graham, who Mark Ward says in this series is, could have been like a Protestant pope or something, sort of having a bit of a joke, but it's like, does he even think that Billy Graham was even a Christian at all? I mean, to me, he's like absolutely so far from Christianity. This guy was an absolute heretic, like rank one. Like, I mean, if you were to go through and just spot the heretic, it's like, yep, Benny Hinn, and yep, Kenneth Copeland, yep, Billy Graham. It's so obvious, to spot the heretic. But apparently, people who believe we have a Bible are the heretics and causing the division and not charitable. But I would just say I get tired of the tone police type of thing. It's like, you just say something that's just true. You say, okay, well, Tommy Wasserman doesn't believe in hell. So maybe Gurry and all the other guys, Hickson and Boyce, maybe they shouldn't really hang around him. Maybe they should say, oh, he's a heretic. I think Boyce actually doesn't believe in hell now. It's pretty weird. But the thing is, I was pointing out Jennifer Knust. She's just basically like, yeah, I'm not really a Christian. I'm just sort of hanging around the scene. And Tommy Wasserman threatened to sue me the other day for saying all this stuff. And she's basically promoting the LGBT lifestyle and all the rest of it. And she's one of the main editors of the New Revised Standard Version updated edition. Like one of the main, not like Virginia Mollenkott, was sort of like, NIV in the back blocks just as a consultant, but that was bad enough to rattle the cages of conservatives. They were like, what? They've got these type of people working on the translation. This is bad, and then there was another guy who came out in the NIV and was like, okay, he'd become a homosexual. But this lady's like one of the leading ones. And when you watch her videos, you just sort of like, okay, this is like woke on steroids. Is anyone talking about this? And it's like, oh, well, she co-wrote a book with Tommy Wasserman, who all the critical text guys say is great. And it's like, oh, no, these guys are just living in the sewage. But this is one of the things that I can't understand. Why aren't these things being brought up? And I know on my channel, and probably in my life in general, I usually bring up things that no one else is talking about because it's like everyone else is just talking about, these lovely things and this and that. And it's just like, well, this is the elephant in the room here. Or the king has no clothes, and they all turn around and look at me and say, how dare you say that? Don't you realize my feelings are hurt? How uncharitable, how divisive, how, you just watch Mark Ward's videos and you just left there going, man, did I just come out of Berkeley? You know what I mean? And just say, hey, freedom of speech is good or something. And then, 15 people are going, hey, you disgusting man. That's what you feel like after watching Mark Ward's videos. It's like woke Christianity. But one of the things is, it's almost like an English Bible. You can have the Septuagint that Jesus used, because it's Greek, is a sanctified language apparently. But you can't have English, and this is one of the things. It's actually almost like an anti-colonialist, anti-British, anti-English type of thing. The words of God are in the King James Version. Now, many people say it's in the underlying text. I say that as well. Had they printed that text, I would say, yep, that Greek matches the English. Both are good. One is in Greek, so that would be akin to the originals. The King James Version, the KJV, is a translation. The KJV is a Bible, so it is a definitive, the final Textus Receptus edition. So basically we see from Complutensian Polyglot, Erasmus's 5 editions, 4 editions of Stephanus, the 5 editions of Beza, and a whole bunch of others scattered in between. We see it comes to a pinnacle, the King James Version, and since then, there's just been regression till now. We just have like Westcott and Hort it just dropped to like 1,000 points. It's like snakes and ladders, almost right down to Marcion sort of stuff. And so this is one of the things too. A lot of people were defending the text against people like Marcion and saying the harshest criticisms. I know he did a few other things, but a lot of the criticism was about the text that he was making. And so read Matthew 23, Jesus saying, you bunch of snakes, you hypocrites. I hate the whole tone police thing. It's like, oh, how uncharitable, how nasty, da-da-da. I mean, I would just challenge these guys to just go out on a Saturday night when they're at the front of a bar and go street preaching. And you'll get a whole bunch of Muslims come up and swearing at you and carrying on, and a whole bunch of drunk, especially here in Australia, drunk Aussies, and they're saying, nah, mate, we come from a baboon, and they're just joking around, and you're like, well, and you have to deal with all that, and you get over the whole tone police thing. I think these guys are just, many people talk about echo chambers and stuff like that. Mark Ward he needs to get out more, man. Yeah, come to on a missionary trip to Papua New Guinea with me, or to Pakistan, or come to Australia and we'll go street preaching, and you'll soon break out of that whole thing, and you'll soon start to see that every second person is saying the Bible is full of contradictions, the Bible is full of mistakes, there's so many translations, and they're saying all these things. That's why people who have their finger on the pulse, they're looking at this going, man, this is a disaster. Because a lot of the things they're bringing up are true. When they say, a lady who's raped has to marry the husband. I'm like, yeah, if you read the ESV, you have to do that. If you read the King James, that's not true. And they're like, oh, okay. And they're like, well, so there's good Bibles and bad Bibles. And I usually just say, well, a lot of the Bibles are owned by Rupert Murdoch. And so here in Australia, most of our media is owned by Murdoch. Nearly everyone knows the name. Like, it's a stain. And so people go, oh, okay, now I get it. Okay, so he's trying to make money off it. Yeah. And that's why I said, just go back to the King James. And it's quite amazing that people on the streets, I can talk to them about it. I talk to Jehovah's Witnesses. One of the first things I go to is the Bible text, and have great conversations with them about Westcott and Hort and Unitarians working on their thing. And they're like, wow, lots about this issue. And then I bring it all down to showing them where there's errors in their Bible. And I say, look, you guys are saying there's errors here, and do you agree that's an error? And they're like, yeah. And then I say, well, okay, well, King James doesn't have that error. It says this and that. And going through manuscript evidence, the last 12 verses of Mark and things like that. And it just avoids the whole issue. What I'm doing, I'm going to the very core foundation of what they believe. and what their scholars are saying, because basically their scholars are just in agreement with Munster, and they're in agreement with Carlo Martini, and they're in agreement with Westcott and Hort, and it's like all of a sudden everyone's all in agreement, but this branch of Protestantism is in agreement too, and they're sort of leading it with a bunch of Catholics, and it's like, to me, it's just these guys have the wrong Bible. They have the wrong spirit. Their Bible is full of solecisms. How do they explain the solecisms in their Bible? How do they explain, 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 16, where it says, God was manifest in the flesh? How do they say who or os appeared in a body, a predicate without a subject? How do they explain that? They have to go with Hort's hymn theory that he sang a hymn, because the text so abruptly changes. It's like, oh, you just, started singing a song, like a bit like, if I was here now, just grab the guitar and just started singing, a Doors song or something. It's like, I'll write that down too. That's how dumb some of the reasoning is. And there's absolutely no evidence that that ever happened. Hort just made it up. And that's become the official. Even in New King James, it has the correct reading of God, but it has the other part of it in strophes. So it has it in strophes, like it's a psalm, like it's a song. So anyway, I'll let these guys continue.
What's the state of the debate, from my opinion, sort of a roundup where we are. And I've been thinking about this. My observation would be, having listened to Dr. Riddle on your channel, and of course I've listened to and read stuff from him for several years now, and Dr. Van Cleek, and those are the two, major figures on the pro-TR side, the people.
So you notice these are the two major figures on the pro-TR side. So I guess D.A. Waite, the Dean Burgon Society, they don't exist. This is just amazing to me because, if you just go through sermon audio, type in D.A. Waite, and go through his, or even Dean Burgon Society, they've been having meetings since 1979, man. Theodolitus was at their first meeting. We're talking about, full, guys, a whole heap of guys, Kirk DeVitro, tons of different people being involved with the Dean Burgon Society, and them talking about issues as they're coming out, talking about all the New King James has just come out. What about this? What about that? What about this reading? And them going through and counting letters and counting how many words are there, and there's this many less words in the New King James, and then going through and comparing and then comparing that with the Greek, and obviously nearly everyone uses the Textus Scrivener. And so it's like, which TR if they were just to go, which TR to the Dean Burgon Society, they say, Scrivener. And so it's like, okay, it's like a non-issue. It's just an issue that's been created simply because the King James translators didn't print a Greek and Hebrew edition when they brought their English out. Had they done that, this wouldn't even be an issue. And so it's like, I actually tire talking about it because it's just such a non-issue. But for these guys, it's like, which TR, and even at the beginning, he's like, I choose the text of Erasmus and that. And it's like, okay, so I choose the one by, Carlo Martini, the guy who was in line to be a pope. I choose the one by Westcott and Hort, the one with George Van Smith, who was a Unitarian who worked on the text. Why aren't they talking about these heretics who worked on the critical text? Why aren't they talking about this? This is modern times. This is Unitarian influence. The text. Why aren't they talking about the Bible Society being totally overrun by Unitarians? So much so that the Trinitarian Bible Society had to be formed. They don't want to talk about it. It's just, let's just talk about, the halt. How long halt you between two opinions? And it was funny, like one of James White's books, got the Potter's Freedom, at the top. He had someone endorse it, and it had, the church has been halting between two opinions. I was like, you have to chuck out James White books now because he has halt there. It's like, and it just amazes me that, and the thing is, what I find Mark Ward does is he avoids the whole textual issue. And as I pointed out the other day, I just went through a quick, it was like probably a 20-minute breeze through his website and just showed where there's a whole bunch of mistakes there, where he doesn't show where the critical text deletes words or changes words. It's like he's only just chosen the big ones to show people. And it's like, no, beginning and the ending, that's 5 English words. It's 3 Greek words. Why are you taking that out of the? Why are you not showing people on your parallel King James Version website this material? And I was listening to him talk about the dishonesty of these King James people. They're so dishonest. If you find that someone is lying, once or twice, you might forgive them. But if it's a constant thing, well, you have to really say that they're a liar, and he basically says all King James people are liars in this video. But at the end of the day, his scholarship is poor. Just go to Revelation chapter 1, verse 8, and compare the Nestle-Aland text, compare the ESV, compare it to what he's saying. This is just like a cursory look. I was just like, okay, I'll do a video. We'll look at these few verses. I was just throwing them out there like it was like 6 o'clock in the morning or something. And it's like, look, mistake. And that's how many mistakes are in his work. It's just flooded with mistakes. I'm sure if I actually sat down for a month, went through his whole entire website, okay, copied and pasted things and checked it and made sure, it represented the changes. I reckon I would seriously, I estimated about 800. Just looking the other day, I would say there would be over 1,000 mistakes in his website that he's telling us we need to go to because we can't know Greek. And if we don't know Greek, how are we going to know, the difference between English Bibles if we don't know the Greek and all this sort of stuff? And he tries to make out that the King James Bibles or the TR-based Bibles and the critical text, there's not that much difference. And it's like, yeah, okay, well, the critical text Bibles and the Passion Translation, there's not that much difference. No, you just say, I'm just lying, or maybe I've got financial gain to be made from saying those sort of things. Maybe I've got, shares in the Passion or something. But it's like, these guys will demonize the Passion Translation, and rightfully so. But these guys just have very low standards, and they overlook a whole bunch of things. They're poor, they're just poor scholars. I understand. Look, I run a website, and I've got how many pages have I got? I think it's like 50,000 pages, and I've gone. Like last night, it was like 1 a.m, and I'm typing things out, copying and pasting things. And it's like. And the next day you can look at things as like, oh no, look at my spelling, look at this and that, look, oh no, I pasted that in the wrong place, oh no, this is wrong, the actual wrong scripture, let's go and check it. And so, and sometimes years later I think, oh no, I've had that on there for like 10 years and it's wrong. But the thing is, I'm just, plodding along there trying. He's had guys helping him with this site. And all he has to do is basically just go through, read the English and read the Greek and show where the Greek is changed. Even if he just got the ESV, he could do that. You know what I mean? It's pretty basic what he's doing. I mean, a lot of the time, even if you just did a Wikipedia search, you can find where there are missing words in modern translations. And so anyway, I'm saying all this just to show to you that Mark Ward is not a scholar. He doesn't really know that much. And so anyway, let's just continue.
People who have the most training and capacity in that world, and they are intelligent men. It sure seems to me, however, that we are in the talking past one another stage, and I'll kind of be even-handed here, maybe, and say that both sides tend to stick to saying what they like to say, and there is some failure to really listen. I like to...
And this is what I find with nearly every one of Mark Ward's videos. He's accusing us of not listening to him. Oh, I wish they would just be more charitable, and I wish they would all listen. And we're talking past each other. people just don't want to deal with his stuff because it's not intellectual. It's not intellectually stimulating to debunk someone who just has 1,000 errors in his work. You know what I mean? It's like, what a waste of time. And he's like, none of these King James guys have really done a rebuttal of my book. They've just avoided it. Sort of like, it's like James White just saying, oh, no one will debate me. No one will debate me. So I went, it's because I'm so superior. And it's like, no, it's because, like, seriously, I would way rather talk to someone like James White. James White knows issues. He knows his stuff. Mark Ward is just like readability. He's talking about readability as if it's a new thing. He's like the other day, like, oh, Webster's on my side. It's like, haven't you read Webster yet? haven't you realized that the Webster, you did the dictionary, that's the one that King James guys are like, hey, Webster's dictionary actually has a lot of King James definitions in it, because he did a dictionary to help people with that in 1828. And then in his 1833, he's actually done a translation. And in the preface, he's got, there are hard words. I mean, I've heard D.A. Waite talk about, I've heard nearly every King James person on my groups that I've run since like 2008, people talking about this. And he's just all of a sudden like, oh, this guy's on my side. He's one of us. It's like, no, we realize that there are deficiencies in reading the King James Version. We realize there are hard words. We realize that there are places where it's like, okay, the syntax, the grammar, things can be a little bit backwards and things can be a little bit old or obsolete or archaic. But at the end of the day, the people who were supposed to clean those things up, Westcott and Hort, they deceived Christianity. They snuck in a never seen before Greek text and pronounced that it was the best. Vaticanus. It's like the Complutensian guys, they knew of Vaticanus. They didn't even use it. They said it was rubbish. Erasmus said it was a back translation from the Latin. Even John Mill, 1707, he was saying it's a back translation from the Latin. It's not. These guys didn't like it. The Reformation rejected Vaticanus. Sinaiticus came along. Anyone with any bullets in those days, like say someone like Burgon, he's just like, this is corrupt. It's a corrupt text. Hoskia. And so, even though I don't agree with everything those guys did, they had enough bullets to totally destroy, concepts like deleting the last 12 verses of Mark, because of these two manuscripts. It's like, how diabolical. When does it get to the point where it says in Revelation chapter 22, verse 19, if you add or take away from the words of this book, your name, your part will be taken from the book of life. And there's many, many other places. You got Deuteronomy, you got Proverbs, you got places where it says don't add to the words of God. And so when does it get to the stage? Because people are like, oh, it's not a salvational issue. Okay, so I understand Calvinists, they believe in the preservation of the saints. There are many, the vast majority of people who I listen to, even D.A. Waite and many others, they're once saved, always saved, but I'm not. I'm not once saved, always saved. I believe you can lose your salvation. So I read Revelation chapter 20, verses 18 and 19, I go, that's taken. Your part is taken. You've lost it. And so for me, looking at people who are just like, yeah, just take those words out, just throw them in the bin, just like, you see Peter Gurry just there, just going, yeah, I think we just get rid of them, and Stephen Boyce, like the woman caught in adultery story, we should just delete that from Bibles, maybe put a footnote, but that's it, But then lately he's like, oh, I'm not really sure about the last 12 verses of Mark. And so the thing is, the scholars that Mark Ward wants us to go to, Dan Wallace, James White, these guys don't agree with each other. Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. These guys are at loggerheads with that. James White wants to scrunch it up and throw it in the bin. Dan Wallace, he wants to keep it. So these guys are the go-to gurus. They don't even agree. And so that's the thing. There is so much chaos in this group. Firstly, you have the Textus Receptus. We see it go through the Reformation, and then we see people like Luckman, he was the first one to really print a non-TR edition. And then it goes through, he had a different type of methodology. Then, Sinaiticus is on the scene. Okay, we've got to go with that. Then we have Tischendorf, and then we have Tregelles, and then we have, the rising up of the Vaticanus manuscript. Then we have Westcott and Hort, they said they wanted to come against the villainous Textus Receptus. And so then we have Westcott and Hort with their methodology, with their myth of Eleusinic recension, which was totally debunked by people like Sturz. When you read Sturz's book, or basically the finding of the papyri, which had Byzantine readings in it. So they found a whole bunch of old Byzantine readings. So they're like, well, these are before Eleusinic recension sort of thing. And so it's like, there goes Westcott and Hort's theory. But instead of going, well, maybe they shouldn't have changed as much, it's like, no, let's stick with that. Go through the Nestle, father and son, and then get to, Metzger and Black and Carlo Martini, who's in line to be a pope at the time. And so we have this whole Catholic influence on the text. And at the time, Nida, he's, huge in the United Bible Society. I recommend anyone read David Cloud's material on all that. And so then you can, the methodology's changed again. So then you get to the time of Bart Ehrman, and Bart Ehrman's like the orthodox corruption of scripture, focusing mostly on, the reason why we have a Byzantine or a Textus Receptus is because these faithful scribes wanted to add to the text, the Lord Jesus Christ and all this stuff. It's like, and then now we've got a whole different methodology with the coherence-based genealogical method, and it's like, apparently they're going to bring out the Finnish Bible in 2032, and it's like the methodologies have changed. The people are like Unitarians working on Westcott and Hort's text, like George Van Smith. I've done videos on that. These are issues that need to be brought up. Why is no one talking about all this? Why, so anyway, I just find that the critical text position is totally untenable. And Mark Ward is pleading with us with tears in his eyes, my brothers, my wayward brothers, who are just like the Deliverance guy playing the banjo on the porch. Ring, ding, ding, ding. Oh, hey, brother, I got my King James Bible today. He mocks you like that. Because I'm at the other end of it. You got to put yourself in someone's shoes. He's mocking and just saying, these guys don't know Greek and Hebrew. I mean, just go through my website. Go to Matthew chapter 1, verse 1. Let's have a look at the Greek that I've been putting up there for over a decade. Look, I've got papyrus. I'm going through all the papyri manuscripts. Minuscules. Let's look at minuscule 51, for example. Just a random thing. And so this has been written about. Kurt Aland, Scrivener, Caspar Rene Gregory. It's in the Bodleian Library. It's got all about that. If I go to Matthew 1:1, all of my pages have the Greek at the top. Then we have the English. Then we have my own English translation there. And so it's just amazing. People are calling me King James only. It's all these new kids on the block who don't know anything. I've been rebuked by the King James only, the real King James only guys for years. I had Ruckmanites. Basically, I was their number one enemy for quite a while until Ruckman died, because I had the Facebook page exposing Peter Ruckman, and so I had dozens and dozens of people contacting me and sending me things and about Ruckman and how he was awesome and all the rest of it, and so, but apparently I'm King James only. I've done my own translation, the 2016 edition, and I've been rebuked by some very good friends of mine, Will Kinney, Stephen Avery, guys who I actually still work with and we're still on the same page, but they're like, we shouldn't update it. That's because Westcott and Hort, they were supposed to do an update, and they deceived Christianity. They went into Christianity and just absolutely deceived everyone, by bringing in a never seen before text, omitting so many words. Their Greek text, as it stands today, Nestle Aland 28th edition, has 2,800 less words. It has 8,000 changes. It's That's not small. It's huge, and so I can understand why people have shied away from me, going through. And at first, some of the things I was changing to editions like the KJV 2000 edition. It's actually written by a Seventh Day Adventist, um, and also uh, looking at editions like Green's, the modern King James version, literal King James version. There is a whole bunch of TR Bibles out there. But what I would find is sometimes I would go, okay, that's the best reading, and I would leave it at that. But then I'd go back and go, hang on, none of those readings are correct. The King James word is correct, but it needs to be updated in this way. And so um, I I found that I lost a lot of respect for a lot of those type of TR Bibles. Like say this is the English Greek New Testament, third edition by Greens. He has the what he calls a literal translation. I'm pretty sure that just became the modern NKJV. And so he's got his Greek here with underlying English definitions. And sometimes I'd read through that and go, oh, okay, that's a really good reading. But on further examination, going and studying these things out, the King James version was always correct, and I can't get around that fact. I understand that many people in the confessional bibliology side of things, they have a theology, and many times they don't deal with the evidence and things like that. But even though many of them do, like Jeff Riddle, but I'm like, okay, I'm dealing with the evidence. Let's just pretend that there could be an error here. Let's go through it. And I look at these things, and the more I look at it, the more I realize how illiterate the critical text guys are. Most of them cannot read Greek at all. I was talking to Andrews, one of the head guys for the New American Standard Bible, and I said, how much Greek do you know? And he went through it, and I said, so could you go to Athens and order a Sivalaki or a gyros or no. He said that's not how you learn languages. And it's like, man, if I said I knew ancient Sanskrit or Anglo-Saxon, surely you'd think I knew modern Punjabi or Urdu, or I knew English or German or something. It's like, oh, I just know Anglo-Saxon. It's like, yeah, I mean, there are polyglots, and there are Librophiles, people who that they love reading older books and things like that, and they love looking up words and dictionaries and stuff. But that all that does is give you a lexical understanding of that one word, the definition of that word. It doesn't give you idioms. It doesn't give you Hebraisms that are in the Greek. It doesn't. It doesn't explain a lot of things, and so it's just a wooden thing like Young's literal translation. You know what I mean? So anyway, I'll just quickly go through this because Mark Ward seems to think that us TR guys we don't know anything about Greek. I've basically the annotations of Beza. I've got them written out here. I didn't copy and paste that. I wrote that out. I copied it from there, typing it out. I've got my own understanding of the Septuagint here because they have a variant in Genesis 2:4, and I believe they copied that from Matthew. Going through comparing the Bibles, then going through Chrysostom, going through Erasmus, Piscator, the King James translation, Adam Clark's, Solomon Caesar Milan. He's going through a whole bunch of Greek issues of why Genesis with two noons is birth, and Genesis one noon is generation. Philip Schaff, Dean Burgon, Revision Revised, showing where they introduce the genealogy of Jesus Christ means the same as all birth, because they're the same Greek word in the um, Revised Version. And so Jehovah's Witness, they have Matthew 1:1, a whole bunch of stuff about them in Sefer Toledoth, or Toledoth. There is the Greek for Genesis. The Hebrew for the Greek Genesis. Crudens, the New King James Bible, why they have a translational error in Matthew 1:1. John Mills, what he wrote there. The Modern English Version. And then I go through, okay, let's go through the Complutensian Polyglot. So I looked that up myself, got that picture myself, and I've typed it out there in Greek. I've got the Aldine, and so you can see a picture of it if you don't trust that I've done that correctly. The Kafalios edition of Wolf Kafalios in 1524. Then we've got the 5 editions of Erasmus. The only one I'm missing there is the paraphrase that he did. And then we got Colonaeus. Then we got Caesar. I haven't got them written down there. But then we got the 4 editions of Stephanus. All the Greek is written out, including the Nominus Sacra. Then we've got Theodore Beza. We've got the Greek written out here because the first one is a Latin edition. That's why sometimes we see the 1598 as the 4th of Beza, where it's actually the 5th, because his first one was in Latin. Plantin Polyglot, we got that. We got Elijah Hutter with his Dodecaglot, his 12 language edition. And then we got the Elzevers, and so, I've put the 2 main ones in there for starters. Actually, I haven't got the 1633. I'll have to fix that. Then we got the London Polyglot. We got John Mill, Scholes. Then we got Scribner, and then we got other Greek. Okay, so we're looking at Papyrus 1 here. It has this. Then we're looking at Vaticanus. Then we're looking at Sinaiticus. And I wrote there most probably a forgery. Going with the scholarship of Stephen Avery. So that would be another guy. Be great to get someone like Stephen Avery onto these programs to talk about. If you brought up anything to do with the King James issue, he would talk about it for an hour. He's a very smart guy. But then they'll just say, "Oh, you're a modalist," and he's like, "Oh, no, I don't agree with modalism." And it's like, "No, you're a modalist." It's like, okay. People just say that. The more I hung around, and the more I realized he's actually like Trinitarian, but he doesn't use the word. Some people don't use the word. When I talked to Andrews, the NASB 2020 edition, Andrews, he did a whole debate not long after that about how he doesn't use the word Trinity because he believes there's baggage in it. And he's like, why do I have to use a term that the Apostle Paul never used? Why do I have to do that to be saved? It's like, he had a good point. And so I don't mind using it. Okay, so we've got Washingtonianus with the Nominus Sacras there. And I've typed all this out. These are coded to the Strongs as well. So if you want to look at Vivlos here, you can look it up. That's the number, noun, nominative, singular, feminine. So I've gone through, made the book, how it appears in English, how some of them have the anathoros, and how that appears, King James Version all the way through to Tyndale, and how it appears in the Textus Receptus. Then the Textus Receptus, where it appears, in what form, how it appears in some of the languages, and then you can even compare, some of these things. And so that's just one Greek word, vivlos. And so going through Codex Cyprius, has Mark whatever, can he read this type of Greek? Vivlos genesios Jesu Christou, we are David, we are Abraham. And so can he look at that? Can he read it? Can he understand it? Could he look at a text like Mills here and go through it? And can he read this? Vivlos genesios Jesu Christou, we are David, we are Abraham. Abraham egenesin ton Isaac. Isaac de egenesin ton Yaakov. Yaakov de egenesin ton Judan kai tois Adelphois aftu. Judas de egenesin ton Pharaz kai ton Zara ek tes Thaima. Pharaz de egenesin ton Ezrom. Ezrom the Egenesinton Aram, Aram, the Egenesinton Aminadab, Aminadab, the Egenesinton Naasson, Naasson. Can he read the Greek? Does he know what it's saying? Because he's basically saying that no TR. When I talk to people like Taylor DeSoto, when I talk to Dane Johansson, these guys are studying Greek. They're studying it quite well. Even Stephen Anderson, he would know way more Greek than Mark Ward. Like if you just cut out, if I could just get Stephen Anderson and cut away the heretical things that he says and the dumb things that he says and does. If you were just to go, okay, the bibliology thing. Now he's got a few little variations from what I believe, but it's like mostly he's TR guy. He would run rings, I think, around pretty much anyone in the academy at the moment, except for, say, someone who was born in Greece. And that's Stephen Anderson. that shows you how poor these guys are in their Greek. Okay, so, yeah, I'm going through we're still going through, I'll just show you, this is other Greek, going through a bunch of minuscules, and then we're going through other printed text, Bengal, Wetstein, Matt Thai, interesting guy, Reesback, Scholes, Luckman, Titman, Thiel, Bloomfield, Tregellis, all the way down to Von Soden, Greek Orthodox, Nessel, Westcott Hort, etc. So, why is Mark Ward basically making out that we don't know the languages? So I've got all the English there. I've got foreign languages, Afrikaans. I've put in this list there. The Amharic, the Ge'ez, Aramaic, the Syriac. So anyway, I know I've diverted, but I just wanted to show you, here's Mark Ward basically harping on about how, we don't know the Greek properly and all the rest of it. TR people, they don't really know anything. We're just hillbillies. On Matthew chapter 1, verse 1, I don't think I know anyone who's gone into this much depth. Welsh Bibles, Urdu Bibles, we've been working on the Urdu Bible translation. And so we have that there. Anyway, so I'll get back to the video. Firstly, I will check and see if anyone's asking questions. Okay, here we go. Watching from Idaho, Mark Ward is the poster child for the feminization of the contemporary church. It is more important whether or not you are charitable than correct or biblical. And that's one of the things. As Christians, we're supposed to be Christ-like, okay? So Jesus, yeah, he was a nice guy. He helped people, he fed people. But sometimes he turned around and didn't feed people on purpose. He's like, they're just following me for food. I'm not going to give it to them. And it's like, yeah, he could come across as like abrupt, but he did it for a reason. And one thing, people are like, oh, we want to be like Christ. We want to show the love of Christ. Read Matthew 23. Jesus is like, you snakes, you brood of vipers. People who are heretics, people who are stopping people from understanding the word of God, from coming into the kingdom of God, from doing a whole bunch of stuff. He's full on with them. Okay, so we got Dwayne Green. Hey, Dwayne, hope you're well. Thumbnail got my attention. Do you want to point out that the which TR is with reference to confessional bibliology? At least that's the context of our conversation. Your King James Version onlyism, I recognize, is significantly different to the... But see, this is the thing. I get labeled as King James only, which if I, and I've done this, I've jumped on, say, like the nerdy theological majors page or the New Testament Greek page. There's a whole bunch of them. And I've said, so if I was to say I was King James only, how would you guys help me? And they're like, oh, you're a Ruckmanite, you're a this and you're a that. You're, a King James only person is in a cult. And so someone who is King James Version light, they just have a TR position, they're still in a cult because, it's our TR position and the King James only position are sort of the same thing. And so now I understand, I've heard you, Dwayne, in your videos say, oh, we're not talking about the extreme types, but it's just a label. And so I only bring that up because some people have to wear this label, like say someone like Robert Truelove. He is like, you know, Robert Truelove or Jeff Riddle or, the guys from Agros Church or, yeah, they're like, we're not King James only. And they have to keep saying it. We're not King James only. We're not. And then James White will say, you guys are King James only. TR position is King James only. And so, but the thing is, James White's 5 editions of King James only means, when I ask the general population, what's a King James only is? Oh, okay, a Ripplinger, Ruckmanite, people who just believe that the Bible floated down from, and it's like, that's the general consensus out there. When you say King James only, it's like you're saying, I'm part of Black Lives Matter. If I said, hey, Dwayne, do you believe Black Lives Matter? You're like, yeah, of course I do. Why are you a communist? It carries baggage. And so there's a whole bunch of baggage that goes with the King James only label. Now, I don't mind whatever you call me. You can call me King James only, Textus Receptus only, blah, 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 blah. And I believe that I've shown that King James only and Textus Receptus only are basically the same. I've shown this for years and years. And I've shown that people who are trying to shun the KJV only label are just trying to get away from that whole Ruckman thing. And I can understand why. People would be on the way to their church. So let's look up this Jeff Riddle guy. Jeff Riddle, King James. Oh no. Turn around. And I'm sure people have dropped off from these groups because of this type of mislabeling and things like that. So, and I understand, I'm not just saying, Dwayne's just doing this, because I've heard him say, I understand that you're this and that. But every time I've talked to Dwayne, he's called me a King James onlyist. How many King James onlyists do you know who have actually done another Bible translation based on the TR? Is that a real King James onlyist? You know what I mean? It's like, I don't know. Like, would you call Jay Green a King James onlyist? He did the modern King James version. Would you call the guys who did the New King James King James onlyists? Because James White does. He calls Zane Hodges, he puts him into a King James only camp. And so it just gets to the point where the labeling is just ridiculous, and it's laughable. Why not? And the thing is too, there's so many different nuances between different people that, yeah, it's like young Earth creationism, cool, but oh, you're a Hovine creationist, or you're a Sephardist, or you're a Answers in Genesisite, or you're a this, and it's like, oh, now I have to know what that guy believes because apparently I'm part of the group, or you're an Andersonite, or it's like, it just gets ridiculous. And people just have this shut off thing. As soon as they hear King James, people just shut off and they don't want to deal with the issues. So anyway, I'll just keep reading through. Your King James version onlyism, I recognize, is significantly different than confessional bibliology. The use of the word KJV only makes it sound like we believe the King James Bible fell out of heaven and landed in a lap in 1611. You know that I understand you're not a Ruckmanite. I've got to run. I'll watch the rest later tonight. And so it's so strange, like, that I would be labeled a Ruckmanite. Basically, I'm at a position where, just say Dwayne decided, hey, I think, or if he looked at the evidence and went through compared the New King James and the King James and went through word by word, and went, oh, hang on, no, there's some differences here, and studied it and went, hang on, the King James is right. Every time that I've done 50 of these studies so far, and the King James is always right. And he's like, well, I think I'm actually preferring the King James. You're a King James only now, sort of thing. And I think this is the scarecrow term to stop people doing that. Critical text people have just created this scarecrow with KJV only written on it, and it's like flapping in the wind. And you come along, and you're like, oh no, this is really scary. This is this real? Is this a real threat? And the thing is, they're basically telling everyone these guys are causing division. These guys are hillbilly hicks who don't really know much. These guys are just, like the guys from the Deliverance playing the banjo on the porch. So anyway, then Dwayne's written, I've got to run. I'll watch the rest later tonight. So I'll just continue through. Let's get back to some more. I've got heaps to go.
To try to show charity by pinning that on me before I pin it on someone else. All I can say is I don't think I failed to hear what they've said, but I will admit that where I still feel that my side has work to do, and where Van Cleek especially, but also Riddle and others who are on that side, where they have a strength, is that they are attuned to the theological questions. I don't think they give the right answers, but I'd like to see my side do more work than Richard Brash has done and then Dirk Jonkind has done, although I think they've done good work on filling out, as Van Cleek would say, dogmatic approach to the issue of preservation.
I mean, James White's talked about that. Dan Wallace, you could just go with Dan Wallace's view on preservation. He said majority text people are modern day Marcionites. That's what Dan Wallace said. Just Google it, Dan Wallace, Marcionites, majority text, and you'll come up with his article, read through it. That's what he thinks. If you believe in preservation, even in a majority text position, let alone TR position, that's just like Ruckman.
We've tended to focus my side more on the evidence. This answer is too long already. I'll stop soon. But on the other side,
it's all right.
On the other side, however,
and so that's where I'd turn around and go, there's plenty of TR people out there who are looking at evidence. Look at all this Greek stuff. Look at all the, I've put it all there. It's very easy to look at. And, I'm not saying that Mark was saying that we don't ever look at evidence, and I say the same thing, where some of the confessional people will say, we don't really need to look at the evidence. We just need to give the presuppositional position from the Bible. And I understand that. And there is a very good case for that. And I'm learning more and more about that as time goes along. And what Riddle is saying and the other Agros guys have said in the past, it does rub off. And it's like, yeah, that's a really good point of view, that we need to get our understanding of all this from Scripture and know what Scripture says about itself.
say, I don't write a whole lot of scholarly articles. I'm a popularizer. When I do it every so often, I really put my heart into it and my time into it. And I wrote an article that came out now, coming up on 2 years ago, in the Detroit Baptist Seminary Journal, which pressed the which TR question on the confessional bibliology folks. And they have not produced an answer. That is, none of their accredited representatives, the people who...
Notice the accredited representatives. It's like the TR position is just like this company or something. We've got the CEOs who are, Jeff Riddle and Trinitarian Bible Society over there, and it's like we're all just this one cohesive group. No, we're all just individuals who have come to the same conclusions. And he's written this article, which TR. Vince Krivda, he wrote about it, and Jeff Riddle, he recently just interviewed Vince, and I got to debate Vince over the issue of Easter, which was fun because we're both good friends. And Vince comes from, confessional reformed point of view. But I'm just going to quickly look through my Textus Receptus Academy, and I'll just type in which TR Ward, and it should come up. When his article came out, we jumped all over it, and I just started to go through. He had stuff about Revelation 16:5, and I'm like, well, yeah, obviously haven't been following that. It's been James White's been yapping about it. I've been yapping about it, and so here we have 36 comments about that. Taylor DeSoto's like, I got a shout out in the footnote. Vince Krivner's responded to this. And then Stephen Avery's written, here's an example of Mark Ward's trickery. He tries to balance the 20 full verses other than the pericope and the mark ending, with the 1 John 2:23b question missing in Stephanus' 1550. This is likely why he took Stephanus' 1550 rather than Beza's 1598, to have a verse distinction so he could pretend it was equivalent to 24 missing verses. And so anyway, it goes on and on. So yeah, if you were to go to my group and just type in which TR Ward and just scroll through, you'll find threads where we've talked about it. And so I actually did start going through it, and what I found was he was that it was just useless. Actually, it's not that thread. That's like a rehash. But I just found it was useless. It was there was just so much wrong with it that I just couldn't really be bothered with it. It was like his website, with what I calculate to being 1,000 errors. It's like, why would I bother reading that? When do you get to the point where someone says something wrong and you're like, that's wrong? Then you read the next sentence, it's wrong. And you read the next one, it's wrong. And then he's calling you an idiot sort of in a roundabout way. And you're like, can I really be bothered with this? And see, I understand Jeff Riddle wants to respond to this, and maybe I will. Seeing Mark Ward just is a constant, bombarding with like, you guys can't read your Bible. How long halt you between two opinions? Instead of dealing with the real issues, the text issues, you bring them up. He's like, what about readability? And it's like, man. So anyway, I'm still just trying to find that, but we do talk quite a lot about Ward on my group. So if you haven't been there, it's Textus Receptus Academy. I won't bore you anymore. We're trying to find that.
Who have the training necessary to answer. They haven't answered publicly. Peter Van Cleek did post something on his blog. It was very short. I found it to be wanting, and I think you were asking some of the same questions to him. I would just observe to people who are kind of on the fence, do you really think that the leading representatives of the confessional bibliology side have actually answered in any kind of satisfactory way the which TR question? And let me press that just a little bit further.
See, the issue is, that's what I've said to the guy, to say Robert Truelove. Okay, which TR? That this is an in-house debate between us and the confessional guys, because the confessional guys won't just say, okay, well, it's this. And so, but some of them do. Some of them say it's Scribner. And so, okay, cool, no worries. But in a roundabout way, because it's Scribner and not Beza 1598, it's like, okay, well, you've had the scholarship of the King James translators to figure that out. So it's sort of exactly the same position as me. It's sort of like, but they don't want to admit that because then you get labelled King James only. So what these guys are doing, they're twisting and turning just to label you. So then it's like, you're a King James only cultist. Instead of, the other guys are coming from a position where they're like, I don't want to be labelled as all this other stuff. I'm Textus Receptus. And even TR only, they're like, no, I'm not that. And, so it's just this trickery. It's just labels. And the whole thing about Textus Receptus, it's just a label that's been put on all the Greek text. There was no critical text around in that time. For hundreds and hundreds and over 1,000 years, 1,500 years, there was no critical text. It's gone. The Vaticanus and Sinaiticus weren't copied and, translated, and there's whole communities touched by all this. It's like they're just dormant. And then they're just resurrected in the last days, a bit like the Jehovah's Witnesses, and they're just plagued us ever since. And it's like, and then these guys are like, so you had it when printing started, the text that you had there was different to this one here, and it's like, well, yeah, there was a progression. There was a progression in all the Bibles, in English Bibles, in the Greek, in a lot of the language Bibles, and it culminated in the King James. That's why it's the final TR. It's very simple. The which TR question is answered. To get the confessional guys to answer that exactly and succinctly as I just said it, that's why I put the saying of Hills on my website about how it's the underlying Greek text. And he says, okay, it's the text of Scribner. Where I'm like, well, I believe Scribner is close, but it's the underlying Greek text that never got printed. Had they printed it, we wouldn't have this issue. So it's no big deal. It's not a big deal. If you're confessional and you're tied only to the Greek, it can become a big deal. If you're trying to avoid the labels that these guys are going to throw on you, they're going to throw it on you anyway. It's like, so I just can't be bothered with, trying to avoid the labels. That's why when people say, "Oh, Nick, do you want to do a debate on my thing?" I'm like, "Yeah, cool." They call it a King James only debate. And I'm like, okay. Even though the site that I run is Textus Receptus, it's like I tried to avoid that label for years and years and years and years. It's just like, why bother? They're just going to throw it at you anyway. Black Lives Matter. Oh, you're a communist. Oh, okay, whatever.
Then I'll stop. He wants to use Matthew 5:18. Peter Van Cleek does. He was appealing to the use of that verse by.
So even like Will Kinney, he's a Calvinist, but we are in agreement that Matthew 5:18 is about the fulfillment of Christ fulfilling the law, and not so much about the fulfillment of the Word of God continuing. And so that's one verse that I've sort of avoided using for at least 10 years. Will Kinney and me chatted about it. We're in debate about that. And so when Peter Van Cleek used it the other day, I was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. And, listen to what he said, but I was thinking, I believe that's, every jot and tittle, not one thing shall be taken from the law until all is fulfilled. So the law has been fulfilled in Christ, but also, I guess, maybe I've got to look at that verse a little bit closer because I've sort of gone, okay, I won't use that because it's, and it wasn't critical text guys saying it. It was actually me and Will Kinney sort of came to a bit of a conclusion about it. But, I'll definitely look more into it.
By older Protestant theologians, whom I also revere, Reformation era theologians, and yet he wants to use it to defend a position where even he is acknowledging there are different jots and tittles out there,
Right.
different sets of jots and tittles. And as Peter Gurry pointed out, there's no manuscript of any size that perfectly matches Scrivener's Textus Receptus.
Like, there's no manuscript that matches Scott and Hort of any size. This is so dumb. And this is the sort of thing that you hear James White say stuff like this, and this is why we get so upset with him, because there's no text that matches the Textus Receptus. I thought, well, yeah, there's no text that matches any of the Greek. All the texts are eclectic. It's like, why make that comment? It's just a nothing. It's like saying, all no Americans can jump 4 feet in the air with their legs cut off. And it's like, no one can do that. Why bring the American thing into it? Why just say Scrivener's TR and this doesn't match any exact manuscript? It's like, yeah, of course these guys. See, what's happened is James White's laid the platform for saying textual criticism. Oh, the King James, translators did textual criticism. Beza did it. Stephanus did it. Erasmus did it. And James White says, see, they did textual criticism just like we're doing now. It's like, no. That's like saying the Americans, when they had the Revolutionary War, they did politics just like China's doing politics now, and Russia. It's the same, because it's politics. It's so simplistic. It's so stupid. I get really annoyed when I hear this sort of stuff. So then they're like, oh, see, Textus Receptus people don't believe that there's variance. They're scared of variance. That's what they're scared of. And then you get someone like Stephen Boyce coming along and he's like, we were told that the blue-bound book of Scrivener was it. That's a TR. And we didn't know there was any other Textus Receptus. And so when I found out, I was shocked. I was like, there's other Textus Recepti out there. And Mark will bring this up. Just read the preface. The preface mentions many editions. It says the 1516, 1519, 1522, 1527, 1535. Look, it mentions competency and polyglot, the Antwerp polyglot, a whole bunch of other editions, and Beezer and 1550, and these are the only 2 pages in English. The rest of it's Greek. And Mark Ward, Stephen Boyce was saying that he thought that this was the text, and he didn't know there are other Textus Receptus, and he sort of shocked at that. And this has become like a okay, guys, I want you to sit down, relax. There are other Textus Receptuses out there, and the King James guys are crying, and the TR guys are looking at each other like, shut him up, this is not happening. Okay, let's just go to my website again. So, look what I've got here. Underneath the label of Greek, I've got Textus Receptus, including what is labeled TR, the Complutensian Polyglot, Aldine, Cephalus, Desiderius, all these editions, pointing out specifically differences in them. I'll just go to the history of this page. Oops, older 500. I'll just go to the oldest. So, 2008. So I started to show the differences in the English Bible in 2008. And you can go through every difference that I've ever made here. I've coded it straight away to the Strongs. Now, I'm not sure when I started putting the TR thing, but it was at least, over 10 years ago. And so I just cringe. I absolutely just cringe when Ward is sort of, saying this sort of stuff. It's, where are we? I'm just going to let him talk a little bit.
Peter Gurry pointed out, there's no manuscript of any size that perfectly matches Scrivener's Textus Receptus. If you're
None of them do. So why bring that up? This is the sort of thing that Mark Ward just constantly says, and James White. They say things that are just redundant. They say things that are just that don't need to be said, and in order to just, hey, 1 + 1 = 2. Like, as if we don't know that. It's like,
you're going to use the Matthew 5:18 promise, and it's so appealing to that side, I get it. I think it's the strongest passage they have. Then you've got...
Okay. The grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of our God shall stand forever, for all generations. I mean, even the retranslation of Psalm 12, 6 and 7, I think it is. And it's like, even their translation of it is saying the people will be preserved because God is faithful to his word. So even the worst case scenario where it's not talking about words, which it clearly is because it's the closest antecedent, but if you twist it like the textual critics love to do, you even still have the people being preserved because of the faithfulness of God's words. And so it's like, but that seems like the only verse they go to. It's like, see, they believe in that one. It's like, the Bible is very clear about the preservation of God's word. Seriously, people need to do just a Bible study on what the Bible says about itself. And so he's saying that's the strongest verse. I've found it's a verse that I don't even really use. Perhaps I should look into it a little bit more, but I find that it doesn't need to be used.
Got to make it fit the actual world that God has given us, or it doesn't work. Apparently, God wasn't making that promise. I'm asking people out there, has the other side answered the which TR question without doing gymnastics? And have they done it in such a way that makes good sense with Matthew 5:18? I think the answer is no.
And one thing I found interesting, like as we talk, I'm taking things in, but as I go and edit video, I take a lot more in when I'm doing that process of editing the video. It's like getting the interview, but just like in a much more intense way, right? So I'm catching things afterwards, and at that point I'm thinking, oh, I should ask this, or I should have talked about that, or whatever it is. But in that spot of seeing this stuff closer, I've noticed that there's kind of a different approach between Dr. Riddle and Dr. Van Cleek, right? Dr. Riddle takes the approach, the family of Textus Receptus editions represents the original text. I'll say the original text. I don't think he used that phrasing, but I think that's what we're both talking about. The way that it's presented, there's still the question of deciding readings, and deciding readings is textual criticism. I think his position puts him in a place where he acknowledges that there are, places in the text where there's some uncertainties, but he would say that there's far more, and it's true, there are far more in the...
Well, see, this is where, the vast majority of people who I associate with, they don't have any uncertainties. They're like, okay, it's the underlying text of the King James. And so, Stephanus had a different reading. He just wasn't up to speed with either Beza or the King James translators. And so it's like, it's not a big deal. And see, this is where, but what I find is, say like what Scrivener did. Scrivener basically went, okay, I'm creating my TR. I'm going to go back and get all the Greek readings from all, competency and polyglot all the way through to Beza. And he found them all. And so this was the type of scholarship that the King James guys were doing. But I've got no doubt that they would have also gone to Ethiopic, the Syriac. These are outside of the closed class of witnesses. Other language Bibles, the Arabic Bible, looking at Persian, looking at many different languages, Coptic, Sahidic. And so they would have been looking at all that as well. But they were also looking at the closed class of witnesses, the Latin, the Greek, and the early church writers. So those are the three things that they would have been looking at. And so the Latin, you have the Greek is the main thing, and you can find all the TR readings in the Greek, okay, in the printed Greek and in the manuscript Greek. Now, whether we can find that today is a different story, because a whole bunch of manuscripts have gone just in World War II alone. 1 million manuscripts, biblical manuscripts, were destroyed. And so we can see, even with my study on Revelation 16:5, the manuscript that Beza said he had, no one knows what it is today. And so I really take my hat off to Jeff Riddle for pushing that whole thing about, he had a manuscript. Because I formerly did believe that, but I changed my mind listening to textual critics too much, listening to James White too much. And then Riddle came along and said, no, let's reread it, let's go back through it. And he was like, no, he's saying that he had a manuscript, and that's become the consensus. And so, except for Stephen Boyce, who can't admit that he was wrong. It's okay to admit you're wrong, bro. But so no one knows which manuscript Beza was talking about, and so there are manuscripts that have gone missing. And so trying to even recreate that now with the extant stuff we've got, we have to do quite a lot more digging to find these quotes in books and things like that, and all the rest of it. And so, and that's stuff that I really enjoy doing and love to do. But apparently I can't even use an Oxford English dictionary. We can't even look at the Greek or Hebrew. We can't discern what a good translation is or not without going to the KJV parallel site, which has 1,000 errors in it. You can't make this stuff up, seriously. It's so ridiculous. I'm just going to see if there's any more comments. Okay, so we've got a few. Stephen Hayes says, sure sign of a weak mind if your standard approach is to cast your adversary with an accepted heretical label and summarily dismiss him without interacting with his opinion or with his position. And that's true. And that's what you find is people just go, like James White, he'll just go, oh, he's a King James only, pigeonhole. But straight away, he called me a Ruckmanite. First time I ever talked to him, 2009. Oh, you're a Ruckmanite. And in my article that I gave him, the the second paragraph says, about Ruckmanism, that I don't agree with it. And he's like, oh, you're a Ruckmanite. So I just said I'm not. And then so I started running the Peter Ruckman Exposed Facebook page. So that because I realized, hang on, that way, if I'm ever in a debate, I can say, well, I run the Peter Ruckman Exposed page. How can I be a Ruckmanite? It's like you have to do that to get out of that, because they're labeling you, pigeonholing you, which is slander. It's not Christian. I could say all Calvinists or Westboro Baptists. These Calvinists, I can't believe they hold these signs saying God hates fags and stuff on the roads, picketing funerals. Why don't Calvinists stop this? Stop this madness. I could pick at the fringe groups of Calvinism and just say, oh, all Calvinists are like that. But I don't, because I'm a Christian. Christians don't do that to other human beings. You don't even do it to worldly people, let alone Christians. That's why when I watch Mark Ward stuff, I'm like, is this guy a Christian? Is this guy even saved? He's just demonizing everyone for having a Bible, for crying out loud. For defending a Bible that's very defensible. Instead, we've got to go with the other Bibles that contradict it. One says, you're not going in. The other one says you are going in. One says no one went into the promised land. The other one says, oh, no, other people went into the promised land. And it's like all over the shop. Stephen Hayes said, if you oppose Calvinism, you're an Arminian, semi-Pelagian. If you oppose modern text criticism, you're a KJV only Ruckmanite. And so, well, this is the thing. And we see this with James White. Like, he's like, he just brings everything back to you're a Catholic. It's like, well, you're not a Calvinist. Well, you're a Catholic. Basically, you're a modalist. You're a if you have certain understandings that aren't Calvinistic Trinitarian beliefs, you're a modalist. You're a Molinist, which is Catholicism again, and people have actually adopted that term for themselves. I'm like, it's probably not the best term, but they're probably just tired of being slandered that way. I don't really follow that many of those debates because I don't agree with both sides. I think there's some truth on both sides, but I think there's a lot of the Bible issues are when it comes to the whole debate between God about God's sovereignty. I think a lot more needs to be gleaned from the Bible itself. And I've had really good Calvinist friends over the years who have tried to convert me to Calvinism. Street preached many times in the Gold Coast with guys who they're all Calvinists. There used to be the Calvinist group on the Friday night and the other guys on the Saturday night. So we would go to the Calvinist group, and it was you'd sort of get warned. It's like these guys are going to try and convert you to Calvinism. So after like a little while, they'll be like, do you believe in the sovereignty of God? And do you believe, and I understand Calvinism pretty well. James White would say I don't, but yeah, the whole thing is it's James White misrepresents people. He often talks about if he took his own advice, he would be brilliant. Because James White often talks about having correct categories, and I'm like, oh, I better have correct categories. So I check myself, but then James White won't have the proper categories. Just the King James only controversy, the 5 different types of King James only, and Zane Hodges is in one, your grandma's in the other, and then Ruckman's in. It's like it's a mess, and so that's why people are all confused about who's a King James only and who's not. And then when it comes to Calvinism, if you say, look, I have a disagreement with this part, and it's like, oh, you're a Roman Catholic. It's like, okay, it's quite interesting. We've been looking at the King James translators, Lancelot Andrews, the Synod of Dort, and the guys from Agros, so they bring out a little bit about this. So it's quite interesting going through that. But I don't want to get sidetracked. I'll let Mark Ward continue.
Critical text. Now, to kind of juxtapose that with Dr. Van Cleek, he takes a slightly different route, suggesting that each edition that led up to the final edition was a more purified form of the Textus Receptus, which is different from Dr. Van Cleek. So they arrive at the same answer. They just arrive there differently.
I guess I wouldn't necessarily say they have the same answer, because Riddle, it seems to me, and I've tried to listen, he has a WitchTR blog post that, actually predates, I think, my journal article. But I believe he said the same thing after my journal article came out, that he really just refuses to land. Like, he does use scriveners, but he recognizes, we do have to do some textual criticism among TR editions. Right. So he doesn't actually say with decided clarity, this is the perfect text, where Van Cleek at least seems to me to come much closer to that, although acknowledging, at least implicitly, that maybe the text will be further sanctified. And of course, this is where Hickson and Gurian and I are all like, then why can't we say that the NA28 further sanctifies the text? And
Well, the thing is, what these guys are leaving out totally is the whole concept of technology. And so, listening to Jeff Riddle, and he was talking to Vince Krivda the other day, they were talking about media. And so I'm not really sure where Vince was sort of going with that. I can't remember, actually. But I was brought back to thinking about how, okay, we look at the printing of the Bible. Now, one of the reasons why the Greek Bible wasn't printed earlier was because it's so hard to print Greek, because there's about 2,000 different characters. The modern Greek Bible that doesn't have the breathing marks and showing things that are acute and things like that, it's a lot easier to print that. But when you look back at someone like Aldous with his printing shop, he had to create about 2,000 different Greek letters, and so then from there he was able to start printing Greek books and how to read Greek and Greek grammars, and then he started printing Erasmus's work. Erasmus, he actually went over and lived with Aldous and proofread for him for about 9 months. He was part of the Byzantine Academy there that Aldous had started, because there was about 5,000 Greeks living in Venice at the time. And so they had a lot of intellectuals there, and they're talking about Bible issues. And Aldous was always wanting to print the Bible, and so he eventually did, but Erasmus got there a little bit earlier. So these guys were good friends. And Bombasius, Paulus Bombasius, Erasmus lived with him as well for quite a while. And so the reason that it took a while for it to be printed was because of this issue of it took a lot of work. It took when you go through your Greek Bible, you can see there's a whole lot of different letters. There's a whole lot of even just the smooth breathing and the rough breathing over an aleph or over an omicron. It can you're doubling, then you're starting tripling words, and then it gets to the point where you've got 2,000 letters. And so Erasmus, he's done his work, and the technology was getting better. So Erasmus worked with what he had, but then it's like, okay, we've had the Complutensian guys, who, by the way, didn't use Vaticanus because they thought it was a piece of junk, probably. The Pope, they got whatever was in the Vatican, the Pope said you can have it, and they didn't pick Vaticanus. That speaks volumes in itself. And so then you have Erasmus does his first edition, and then he starts to make money. I mean, the thing is, Erasmus before that, he's doing okay, but once he's printed the Diaglott, he's making a ton of money from printing. And so then he's done his second, third, fourth, fifth edition, and then you see these other printers. I think it was Collinnaeus. He is the father-in-law of Stephanus. Stephanus, he has his printing press. He's printing for in Paris for the royal family there. he's got money. He's able to collect manuscripts. He's able to do research. He's able to have rooms full of people doing work for him. Then we have Beza come on the scene, and Beza's taken over from Calvin. So he's got all the arsenal of Calvin behind him. Beza was one of the main guys heading up the Geneva Bible. So eventually he wrote a whole bunch of different notes on the Geneva Bible. And so then you have Henry Stephanus, the son of Robert Stephanus. He's teamed up with Beza, and they're looking at Tremellius is looking at the Syriac, Janius is looking at the Arabic. They're looking at the outside of the closed class of witnesses. They're looking at these things and saying, "Wow, this matches up with the TR," and they're polishing the TR. And then it gets to the stage where you get the King James translators. He's got all the authority and funding from the king, and so you are looking at something. When you look at Tyndale, he's on the run. He's hiding. He's got manuscripts. He had a whole bunch of manuscripts that he saw go into the ocean when there was a shipwreck. And he was like, what am I going to do? And he just started again. And so I think that was to do with the Old Testament, though. But at the end of the day, when you look at the King James guys, when you look at Beza, he's mostly living in times of peace. I know there was issues in France and things like that, but it's like mostly he's able to be in Geneva, to have a place where he can have scholars come and go, and he can have people who know their stuff work with him, and he's able to feed them, to house them, to do this sort of stuff. And so that's different to what Erasmus had at the beginning. And the change of technology, it got better. Technology got smoother, printing got faster and more efficient, and the availability of looking at manuscripts became better as well. And people were able to build on Erasmus and the Complutensian Polyglot on their ceiling like it was their floor. So then you have Stephanus standing on their ceiling, and he's created his own ceiling, and Beza's used that as his floor. And then it's got to the King James translators. They're able to look at all of this information, and they're able to create their own Textus Receptus, which is the underlying Greek of their English translation. And then later on, Scrivener's sort of shown, how they probably went about doing that, and which editions they probably grabbed those small, probably about 20 differences out of the 190 lists that he has. Probably about 20 are translatable. And so,
the best I could tell, his answer was, well, because it uses modernistic principles, and it was.
So let me just finish with that thought, because I brought it to there. So printing was invented in 1453, around about that time. And so then the Greek alphabet was sort of introduced around 1500, just a little bit earlier than that. And then Erasmus, 16 years later, he's been able to print his edition. So the technology has just gotten to the point where we're no longer using manuscripts, manus meaning hands and script, for writing. And so what we see is this changing technology has it had to get better and better. And so in a sense where you don't just start with the best technology, you work on it, you go through things. There are printing errors and things like that. There's and when you've got one person working on a project, and then you all of a sudden you're able to afford to have 20 people working on a project. At the end of Erasmus's life, he had teams of people working for him. And so it makes a difference going through that. So that's why, we say, the texts become purer. Well, the text became purer because of these issues. Now, if I was to put the King James Version onto the internet, just say the internet, we're back in the 90s, the internet's just come up, or was it around in the 80s, late 80s? I don't know. I think the military had it back then. But to the general public, we've got the internet. I buy a .com site and I'm editing it, and I copy, I actually type out the King James. I'm just typing it out, or I copy it from some other thing and paste it in there. Now, it mightn't be the Cambridge Pure Edition 1900 the one that people go, yeah, that's the one without all the print errors and it's cleaned up and everything. It mightn't have been that one. It might have been the She Bible or something. It might have had an error in it. But as technology came through, as more people were looking at it, as it became more and more popular, and people started copying things and checking things with more eyes on it, eventually it could have taken 5, 10 years for it to get to the point where it's like, okay, now we've got the definitive King James Bible up there. Where it doesn't mean we didn't have the Bible there. The Bible was still available in manuscripts. So we had the text of, because people are like, okay, where was the Bible before 1611? I'm like, okay, it was in the text of Beza, and probably about the 20 differences were in the margins. So you could actually get the whole of Beza without going to the old Textus Receptus editions. In his annotations, he talks about these issues that the King James translators went, no, we're going to go with this other reading. So it's all in there except for these other places. And then he was like, okay, before that, it's like, well, probably the 1589 edition with other TR editions looked at. And then we went back through this whole thing of like, okay, before that. And this guy just kept asking me, I think his name was Matthew Rose. He sort of trolls me a little bit. And he got back to Complutense and Polyglot. I said, where was it before that? And I was like, okay, I sort of tricked him. It was like in the Aldous edition of 1506, because he did a bit of John there. And in the manuscripts. And so that's where it was. And so it's like, well, the manuscripts were still there. It was a changing technology, just like I have my King James Bible here. And if I'm typing it all onto the internet for the first time, we don't have the Bible. No, we still got it here. It's here, but I'm putting it into a different technology. It's just that back then it took quite a few years. It took, I guess between Erasmus and the King James, it took like 100 years to sort the TR out, and that was by people looking at manuscripts, evaluating these things, and also looking at internal consistency. Also, people becoming more and more educated with the languages and becoming fluent in Greek and seeing things like solecism, seeing things like Hebrewisms in the Greek and saying, well, that's how it should be translated.
Produced by the academy and
Right.
not the church.
When you say it that way, though, that the text is being sanctified, I think his argument is less about the text being sanctified and more the church being sanctified. And as the church gets more and more sanctified, better textual additions come along the line. I think that's his.
I wouldn't say sanctified. I guess if you're talking about progressive sanctification, I believe when you become born again, you become completely sanctified. You're either in Christ or you're out. But I understand the whole thing about, being more like Christ and things like that in your external behaviors and your speech and things. But I wouldn't necessarily say. But then again, you look that the churches were stooped in Catholicism. Martin Luther came along. He did some bad things, but he did some good things. And he challenged a whole bunch of stuff. He started a whole bunch of fires of revival that sparked everywhere. And eventually you have England saying, okay, we're Protestant now. And so that, like, even if you just look at the English case, people went basically being stooped in talking to Mary and talking to priests and all this other stuff to being, oh, we're all Lutherans now, sort of thing. And then creating their own understanding of what it means to be outside of the Church of Rome. And so there would have been this progressive type of sanctification that he's talking about. Then people gravitate more and more to the scriptures because the scriptures, are our life. And so we have the paper pope sort of thing instead of the other pope. And so they're reading the scriptures, they're encouraged to do that. But before that, they didn't have these. And so, of course, they become more learned and they become interested in, okay, where did this Bible come from? Come from the Greek, come from the Hebrew, and then they're looking at other languages. They're looking at the old Latin Bibles that they had and even the old Saxon Bibles, and they're looking at all this stuff and becoming very interested in it. So I would say it's more just an opening of their eyes. There's, people are starting to think about these issues where before that was very small. You see people like Tyndale were, but they were persecuted for it. Now they're not. Now they're free to have Bible studies with 50 scholars sitting around talking about the Bible. But, of course, we see that collapsed when Bloody Mary, came along, but they just moved to Geneva. So that scholarship was there in England. They moved to Geneva and created that. And then, later on they moved back. But so you can see this progression. You can see that there are readings in the Geneva, in the bishops, but then you see it just nailed in the King James. You're like, okay, that settles it. These are good ones, but they made one principal good one out of many good ones.
Argument. Of course, that presents a bit of an issue because, at least in my mind, I wish I had asked him while I was talking to him there, is it seems to suggest that as you get holier, as the church gets holier, their Bible gets better. Again, I don't know if that's a misrepresentation. I know Dr. Van Cleek will probably watch this, and if you do, please feel free to correct me below. That sort of discussion point, it's wrong to suggest that somebody's more sanctified based on the Bible translation they're reading. That's not the measure. The measure of someone being more sanctified is by their fruit, right? Galatians 5, the fruit of the.
But the love of the truth is part of that fruit. And the thing is, if you're reading through the Bible and you spot errors, you have a desire to change that for yourself and also to help others. When I was in Pakistan and I grabbed the Bible, this is the Urdu Bible. It's just the very common one. It's basically like equivalent to the New American Standard. And so I've got the parallel to the New American Standard there. And so basically I'm going through and asking, is this verse in here? What does it say here? What does it say there? Does that mean this? Does that mean that? And just my heart was grieved. I was just like, man, these guys are getting a modern version. And people say, these modern versions don't affect people. This has been in print since 1913, okay? So, and when I say it's like a New American Standard Bible, it's basically like an American Standard Bible. So I should clarify that. So 1913, they changed it. So there's a whole generation, over 100 years, they don't know any other Bible. If you go to the part where it talks about headscarves, that's not in the King James. The woman's hair is her covering. But it talks in the Urdu about the headscarves, like the modern Bibles do. And that's why when you go into the church, everyone's wearing them. And people who are in a Muslim country, it agrees with that, so that they're not arguing against it. They don't want to argue against it because it's like what's in the Bible. And this is where people are like, Bible versions don't change anything and they don't really affect anyone. And it's like, maybe if you've got someone preaching from the pulpit and they're using it at ESV, they can preach a good sermon. That's fine. But half the time you'll find, if you talk to them, I was raised on the King James, or I was in a church where all we used was the King James, and or my dad used to read that, but I've always, read it in NIV. There's this other influence that when you go to places where there isn't the other influence, like asking people who the Word is in John chapter 1, verse 1. Oh, that's the Bible. What about the Word? The Father, the Word, and the Holy Spirit, and these three are one. It's got... No, don't know about that. And so the doctrines are weakened to the point where it's like some doctrines are morphed and changed. Now, I understand you can go to John chapter 1, verse 14, and see that Word became flesh and things like that. But it's like the whole of that doctrine that we've grown up with in a society that here in Australia, we were King James only by force. We're like Canada. We're still under a queen today. And they said you will only use the King James. So for like 100 years, the only Bible you could have was the King James. We were King James only before King James only was King James only. Anyway.
The Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, so on and so forth. Yeah, that doesn't sit well with me so much.
Yeah, I do definitely agree. And of course, you and I talked about this we keep up something of a texting conversation in Facebook Messenger, and I appreciate interacting with you. I actually like it that you aren't quite where I'm at on these things, in part because I really want to model a graciousness in discussion among brothers who disagree on this. And I want to do the same thing with.
I mean, I want to have this gracious conversation with people who disagree. But you listen to his videos, and he's basically like in his video where he talks about, agree or only agree with scholars who agree with me. And he's talking about this King James only guy. He just makes out that he is like some sort of intellectual guru, and King James people are just the hillbilly on the porch playing the banjo in the Deliverance movie. We're idiots, and he's there to help us. But when you look at his website, the KJV parallel website, it's filled with errors. He just doesn't have the goods. I read through Authorize. I think I read it through in a day. I just read through it, and I was like, okay, well, he's made a few points with showing what the Trinitarian Bible Society have been saying for years, and what D.A. Waite has in his defined King James Bible, and nearly every King James person is admitting. But he's like, oh, these guys, they don't understand these words. And it's like, yeah, I mean, it doesn't take much to look them up. It just doesn't take much to do Google a few words here and there. And I was like, okay, well, he's basically doing what King James people do and look up these words. Now, just because they aren't everywhere or in a book somewhere, or, a lot of them are, but he might find the odd one here and there. It's like, see, it's like, well, I mean, I would much rather have an accurate Bible that has a few words that I have to look up every now and then than to have the abortion of Westcott and Hort and their Unitarian friends who were in glee that they took out 1 John 5, 7 and 8, that they changed God was manifest in the flesh to who appeared in the body, creating the biggest solecism in the critical text. George Van Smith, I mean, you can't get around it. They created a Unitarian Bible, and now we have people who are Trinitarians trying to squeeze back Trinitarian readings into the Bible. The Bible Society became Unitarian, basically. The Trinitarians had to leave and create the Trinitarian Bible Society, because there were so many Unitarians in those days in those circles. And I don't want that. I don't want a Unitarian Bible. I don't want a Bible corrupted by Carlo Martini. I mean, people who are still friends with Bart Ehrman. We've got Jennifer Knust. Are we going to include her Bible on the go-to list? Or if I didn't say anything about her, would Mark Ward just hold that up as another good Bible? I mean, we can point out some of these Bible translators. I mean, David Cloud does a really good job in pointing out. He just has lists of. There's a book there called Unholy Hands on God's Holy Book. I recommend it for anyone to read. And that just, it's only thin. It just touches on a few issues. But, I mean, I've met people from the Bible societies. I know about the Bible societies making Bibles in Pakistan with the Muslims, having Muslim readings. I mean, why isn't Mark Ward talking about that? Why isn't he talking about Jennifer Knust? Why isn't he talking about, can he just stop doing all these programs about one little word and do a whole thing about George Van Smith, do a whole thing about Carlo Martini, do a whole thing about how Bruce Metzger said the originals have errors in it, like in the genealogy in Matthew chapter 1. Can he do a thing about that? No, because he gets paid by Lexham Press to demonize the King James Version and to uphold the other versions because you can still make money off it. So it's a cash cow. So these guys are just milking this, and it's like, oh, the King James, we can't make any money off it. Let's demonize it. Lexham, they have their Catholic branch, Verbum. Why doesn't he do a program on that? Why doesn't he do a program on how it's a bit of a conflict of interest that he's talking about how Protestant he is all the time when his company that he works for is deeply compromised? Why is he not coming against the liberalism in the academy. Why isn't James White doing that? Why not do a whole thing on Jennifer Knust? Tommy Wasserman doesn't believe in hell. You going to talk about that? No, we're going to talk about Holt. It just seems that you're straining at a gnat and you're swallowing a camel. This is the problem.
With my, TR defending brothers,
Yeah.
where I think that's become difficult, not impossible, but difficult, is when those who defend the TR use Matthew 5:18 and end up using words to describe the Textus Receptus like pure, perfect, settled, stable, especially though pure and perfect, also preserved.
These are words that nearly every Christian uses for the Bible. We have the Bible, it's settled. I have the preserved words of God. I have, the Bible is perfect, and it's like, yeah, sure, probably, KJV TR people would use, pure and perfect, but I've heard people say it's stable, even preserved. It's like, duh, we can't use these words when we have something that is pure. See, the thing is, Mark Ward doesn't have a pure Bible. He's rejected the TR, rejected the King James, and then he doesn't have a pure Bible. In his mind, the original authors of Scripture made errors. So Luke made it. Matthew was writing along, and the inspiration of God was there, but it's like he couldn't get the right genealogy, even though he was a Jew. And the same list is in the Old Testament like 10 times, but he had to have Asa crossed out and had Asaph there. So he's a psalmist, and also was it Amon? He crossed that out and put Amos there, and it's like, hang on, we've never seen this genealogical list. Well, Metzger just says that Matthew made the mistake, and you just keep reading through. That's his first examples, and then you go through and you just start seeing, there's mistake after mistake after mistake in the originals. See, for a King James TR person, we believe that the text that we have today that doesn't have these dumb errors in them, genealogical errors, historical errors, and all the rest of it, we believe that is akin to the originals because it doesn't have the errors. See, if God was to write a book on mathematics and we were to get a book today and people saying this is exactly what was written 2,000 years ago, and it's like 1 + 1 = 3, wow. You'd just be like, I don't think this is the same. But then you got this other one. It's like everyone's like, don't read it, don't read it, don't read it. It's got hard words in it. And you're like, okay, you got past the hard words, but it said 1 + 1 = 2. It's like, it's accurate though. I'd rather have a mathematical book that had accuracy. If you were going to build a bridge, what would you rather? Have a few old words you had to look up here and there in your mathematics book? Or would you go with the new math? They're pumping out this new math nowadays, how to do your times tables differently. And it's like, the kids come out of school and they're just so confused. But, the new Bibles, they have solecisms, just going back to the original documents. So many errors in the Greek and the Hebrew. Then you have in the Hebrew, they're throwing in Dead Sea Scrolls, the Septuagint, but not everywhere, just smorgasbord, just nitpicking a few little bits here and there where they want to change the text. And then in the Greek, it's like, they've got 2,800 less Greek words and they've got 8,000 changes. And historical errors, geographical errors, the swine marathon where you cast the demons into the pigs and they end up 30 kilometers away. These bizarre readings that many times even Vaticanus and Sinaiticus are wrong at, and they have to go to the Byzantine text just to get the correct name of a town, because the Byzantine text is correct. The TR is pure, it is perfect, it is settled, it is stable, it is preserved. So I would be lying to myself if I didn't say those things. But Mark Ward's saying it's wrong to say those things.
What those words all seem to me to add up to say is we have every jot and tittle, none missing, none added, and all in the right order. And if you present that to a layperson, which is what they do, and say, our side is going to give you the perfect text. Of course, don't you want that? Their side is going to give you an uncertain text. That just heats up the level of the debate. If I can get people to acknowledge...
It heats up the level of the debate. No, we're just being true. We're just being factual. That the critical text, I mean, the thing is, you guys will delete the last 12 verses of Mark over Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. All the other history is just thrown straight in the bin. And you'll delete 12, get 12 verses, write it out by hand, 12 verses, and then just scrunch it up and put it in the bin. It's a lot of words. It's a huge chunk of text. A woman caught in adultery. Screw that up, throw it in the bin. We're talking about like 250 passages of the Bible that are placed in doubt by the people from the critical text side. That's diabolical. That's the work of Satan. I mean, Satan comes and he omits the words. The Bible talks about, the good seed going out, and the devil comes and takes the word. And I've seen that many times with people who are, I'll be talking to someone and their friends will come along and say, the Bible says, it's okay to rape someone and that person has to marry you. And it's like, hey, that's the NIV and the ESV. It's not the King James. And you have to go through this thing, but they're like, that's rubbish, and they walk off. And the poisoning that's come from people like Bart Ehrman. I mean, the thing is, these guys aren't that much in disagreement with Bart Ehrman except for his atheism. I mean, he's still doing a lot of stuff in the academy. Anyway, I'll let these guys continue.
Knowledge, and I think this is what is happening. The sort of drumbeat from my side, from Peter Gurry and I, Tim Berg and others, and now you're helping here, is which TR, which TR, which TR, which TR. And we're forcing them, I think, our brothers in Christ, to acknowledge, okay, it's not perfect, but it's way more perfect and way more pure than the one you've got. Well, take that to the lay people and see how they respond. I think...
Well, I am a lay person, and I have responded, and I don't necessarily adhere to, like, say, when I'm talking about to Robert Truelove, and I'm talking about Revelation 16:5. He's like, look, I don't really care either way, sort of thing. And I'm like, I do. I care about every word. Some people they have a more broader approach. Some people it's more narrow, and I found that the more that I studied this, the more excited I got that the Word of God was true. And when there's a challenge that, hey, the Word of God isn't true in this one part, I'll look at it and study it. And then when I get to the answer, and it's like, wow, that is such a good answer. That is, that's the hand of God. That shows that I was illiterate on that. And then I look at other people and I'm like, well, it shows that Mark Ward and Stephen Boyce and Metzger and these other guys, they don't realize this thing. And yeah. So, yeah, at the end of the day, I think these guys are trying to pin down the confessional text guys. And so I would agree with the vast majority of their position on bibliology. But when it comes to this, I would say that the King James is the final edition of the Textus Receptus, or specifically the underlying text of the King James, that they never got around to printing. That Scrivener later on did.
They're going to say, wait a minute, the whole reason I bought into this is I'm an inerrantist. By the way, I'm an inerrantist too, so is Peter Gurry, so is Elijah Hickson.
Yeah.
Inerrant. Like, okay, so how do they explain the solecism at 1 Timothy chapter 3, verse 16, where it has a predicate without a subject? It's a solecism. It's probably the biggest solecism in the critical text. How do you explain that? And tell me where Hort got the hymn theory from. And then tell me that you believe in that the Bible is without error.
So is Tim Berg, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought you were giving me the pure and perfect text that was from the pure and perfect stream, and the other side had unaccountably opted for the impure and corrupted stream. Now you're telling me that your stream is not perfect, but if we can get Van Cleek and Riddle to acknowledge that, I think that's going to lower the temperature of the whole debate, because people are...
It's not about lowering the temperature of the debate. Mark Ward is sort of like, I want these people to stop reading the King James, or if they continue doing it, to have all these other Bibles that contradict even each other, that have these weird readings, that have geographical errors in them, that have genealogical errors in them, that introduce Gnostic concepts. I want them to have that as well because of Lexham. Lexham pay me to say this.
They're going to recognize, oh, okay, I don't really have as high a horse to sit on as I thought that I did.
Right.
I have to do textual criticism too.
That's the
whole argument with James White. You know, the TR people have to do textual criticism. Like, so we're like, yeah, and like Erasmus, yeah, sure, he did textual criticism, but that's not the same textual criticism as today. And like I said before, it's like comparing the American Revolution politics to Chinese politics today. They're both politics, but there's a world of difference. The whole concept of, you know, you have to go with the shorter reading, you know, the harder reading, all this sort of stuff. You wouldn't say Erasmus just went with those things, would you? You wouldn't say Erasmus was using modern critical text concepts. That would be dishonest and that would be stupid. So you must recognize that the textual criticism that you're claiming, you know, guys from the Complutensian through to the King James use, that is poles apart from what is labelled as textual criticism today. And so why try and say that they're the same thing? That is deceptive. That's what James White does. So Mark Ward's just doing it as well. Obviously, he's learning from these other guys how to argue with King James only people and how to demonize them and how to make people distrust them and how to make it look like they don't know what they're talking about and all the rest of it. And so he just brings up these, you know, they did textual criticism. So, oh yeah, well, the Americans, they just did politics, just like the Chinese, just like they're doing in Russia today. Same. So it's just a lie. And so this is what every video I watch of Mark Ward's, I'm just like this in my spirit, like cringing. Like, it's another lie. Oh, it's another slander. Oh, it's another falsehood. Just constantly. And that's why I just can't understand why anyone gives him the time of day. And he's complaining that no one's, you know, looked at his Which TR article. And it's like, do you blame us? I mean, no one's looked, you know, I can say, oh, how many people looked at my Revelation 16:5 article? Has Mark Ward looked at it? Well, it's just because you're full of vindictive hate and you don't like us. It's probably never even heard of it. You know what I mean? It's like, or you looked at it and went, oh, I'm not interested. I looked at Mark Ward's article and I looked at some of the footnotes where he talked about Revelation 16:5 and went, he says it's a conjectural emendation. He's wrong. I've just proved that wrong. Jeff Riddle came across the top of that, said, bang, they've even got a manuscript on top of that. And it's like, there you go. Doesn't he know that? And then it's like there was a whole bunch of other things like the edon and euron, which are both translated in the Latin as invenerant. So they're basically synonyms. And so there's not much difference between them. In Greek editions, you can go, okay, which word is in, which word is out. But in the King James, they're both going to be translated as saw. When they saw the child or when they found the child. It's they're both synonymous, and so I write quite a lot about that on my website.
Acknowledgement here is that both sides have a sort of inverse relationship to each other. And what I mean by that is if you take TR advocacy, you'll note I'm using TR advocacy. I'm trying to be charitable to my
a neutral
TR
designation.
brothers. Yeah. So the TR advocacy, they're very strong. very strong on the theological argument. So much so that Peter Van Cleek has even done a philosophical argument. Whether you think that philosophical argument is strong, I'll leave that to the reader to determine. But, there's a lot of thinking that has gone into the position from that angle. And so their theological argument is pretty robust. But then the evidence doesn't necessarily match up. And
so this is where I would agree with what Dwayne's saying here. The old school guys from the Reformed camp, they're like, okay, let's look at what Owen said. Let's look at what these people said in the past, and they've developed a bibliology around that. And oftentimes, the bibliology books that we grab off the shelf have been influenced by that type of thing, and so I appreciate a lot of that, the thought going into the presupposition. Presuppositional bibliology. But I also think there is this other side of the coin where sometimes people shy away from evidence. I don't find Jeff Riddle doing that at all. I find that he usually goes, okay, well, this is my philosophical argument here, but here is why. Here's some evidence to show why it's stupid to believe this other thing. And so, anyway, so I agree with Dwayne on that.
So there's all these hoops to jump through in order to deal with passages like 1 John 5, 7, and 8. Though I will say Riddle...
So just on that, I'm going to rabbit trail, but I think I have to here. If you go to my website, many of the pages have this down the bottom. If you go to 1 John 5, 7, you can go to an index of Johannine articles, and you can see where, I've got some of these pages are, they're unfinished. Some of them have a little bit of information, but there's enough information to get you on the right track with the comma. Okay, so he's in the 15th century, so I think it was in 1430. Bryennius. I compare this to Scrivener here. He has the comma. So basically, he tu orano hopater hologos ki tu pneuma to agion. So that it has agion pneuma here in the Scrivener. So, but it has the same words. It's just that they're reversed, and this has a definite article here, and then it has ki hote hotres en esi. So it has, and there are three, and then verse 8, the spirit, the pneuma, with the water and the blood. So, but you can see the similarities between Scrivener there. So when people like, Erasmus, he just got it from here and there, and this is Greek. So I went through this document here, which was actually by Eugenius Vulgaris. You can click on there and see the link and find out who Vulgaris is there. But that's just one of the articles where you can see Calicus, very similar thing. And so he had a Latin and Greek. So he has got hopater hologos kaitou pneumaton agion. So we see that it's exactly the same as what Bryennius had. So when was this guy around? This guy was in 1410. Okay, so there's a whole bunch of really good information about the comma. You can look up about Eugenius Vulgaris. You can even go to my website, which is johanninecomma.com. I might as well go there. And it goes to Vulgaris vindicated by leading Greek expert. So this is talking about Georgios Babiniotis, and so I contacted him and asked him about the grammar, the grammatical issues, and it's his letter to me about that. So I think these are things that need to be looked at. Most people aren't looking at that; they're just looking at the Greek. But if you take the last 12 verses of Mark, right, the critical text people aren't interested in the majority text. This embarrassment of riches they throw in the bin and they go to Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, okay? But when it comes to the comma, we have the rare occasion where it's inverted and we have a lack in the Greek manuscripts for the comma. And we admit that and we say, yeah, well, that's a problem. But then we look at the Latin, we go, okay, it's in 95% of the Latin. It's hugely attested in the writings of the church and in the ancient church. And so the three closed class of witnesses, Greek, it's lacking in the Latin, it's there in the writings, it's there. And then we look outside of that, we look at the internal evidence. So that's what we're looking at here. So these are things that need to be understood and need to be looked at. But I just find with what was just said, it's like people don't really want to look at the evidence. Now, I'm not saying perhaps there are confessional bibliology guys who haven't looked at that, but I mean, Taylor DeSoto, he basically just read through that article recently and said, look at this evidence. When you look at Jeff Riddle, he's got a whole bunch of grammatical stuff about Edward Hills. He brings that same type of grammatical argumentation up. And so it's like, it's there. It's sort of like, well, people are bringing these things up. And so I just feel that, there is, these guys are basically saying, we're going with what the Bible says. We're going with what this presupposition. And then some people are just saying, well, I've got the presupposition. I don't really care what the evidence says. The Bible, we should have a Bible that's accurate. We should have a Bible that's here today. We're able to use it and it's accepted, and it's the voice of the shepherd, sort of thing. And it's like, but for some people, they're like, no, we want evidence. We want this and that. But when you go to the mat over this evidence, I've talked to the leading Greek expert in the world. Just ignored. I mean, people, I posted this on a few groups and people were just laughing at it. And it's like, people aren't interested in the facts. It gets in the way of their story of, that apparently, see, the thing is they won't deal with the fact that there's a solecism there. There's a Greek grammatical error in verse 8 when you take the comma out. And so they don't want to deal with that. They just want to basically say that, oh, it's fine, the comma just doesn't fit there. And it's like, well, if you take the comma out, you have this grammatical error. But amazingly, Cyprian sort of made this word up, or made these words up. They became like a marginal note. They got expanded to talk about verse 8, apparently. And then it got sort of slotted back in the Greek. And it just so happens to fix the grammatical error. It's almost like a miracle. It's almost like it was there in the beginning. It's like, anyway, so I just sort of bring that up, that it's like, anyway, so let's just let Dwayne continue.
Dr. Riddle has taken a lot of time to look at that. He's got some interesting stuff, but I don't know if I agree with his. Riddle has taken a lot of time to. There's all these hoops to jump through in order to deal with passages like 1 John 5, 7, and 8. Though I will say Dr. Riddle has taken a lot of time to look at that. He's got some interesting stuff, but I don't know if I agree with his conclusion. And then other evidential stuff like the manuscripts in generally. In fact, it's almost to the point where the evidential stuff is rejected in favor of their theology. Now, if we flip over to the CT side, and again, I say this not adhering to either side, right? So I'm kind of like the middleman in the discussion, but not a
double-minded man, unstable in all his ways.
Yeah, sure. But then if you move over to the CT side, there's tons of evidential stuff to look at. In the words of Dan Wallace, he says, an embarrassment of riches. Now, I have a little axe to grind with that, but there is a lot of stuff. So the evidential side of the CT argument is very favorable. There's lots to go on. But the theological side needs a bit of work, and I think we touched on this a little bit before. What do we make of the theological side of the critical text argument? Why?
Well, I think the thing is, when someone, it's like I pointed out the error, a handful of errors that I looked at Mark Ward's KJV parallel Bible, and when does it get to the point where someone's a bad scholar? Now, when I looked at Jan Kranz's material, I was like, okay, that's an error. Okay, he's talking about the Ethiopic, but that's an error. He's talking about this and that's an error. And it's like, like say with James White, I pointed out nearly everything he said was wrong about Revelation 16:5, and he hasn't, debunked to me or anything. He doesn't know what to do with that. And it's like, when does it just get to the point where someone's a bad scholar, where what they say just is wrong? I mean, this is sort of what's coming out of Munster. It's like, oh, we've got all this evidence on our side, and it's like, but almost all the evidence is rejected in last 12 verses of Mark. So it's not evidence based; it's an art form. These guys are doing what they feel is in their heart. They're like, oh, I don't like those verses, chuck them out. It's like, but we've got so much evidence for it. Vaticanus and Sinaiticus have priority, and it's like, it becomes an art form where it's not a science. This is not science. The CBGM, they've admitted that it's going to be biased towards the people who are putting in the coding. The people who are coding that, they are going to have a bias. They're going to create a bias in there. So they might throw in a few Byzantine things here and there, but at the end of the day, there is a huge bias in that. So it's not a science.
Why should we be moving into an NA 29th edition?
If I can keep my brain on track, which is not a guarantee, I'll have 3 points here. I'm a Baptist preacher, ordained, 3 points, okay?
There you go.
One is that I actually am satisfied with the current major answer of the critical text side when it comes to theology. My admission earlier that I think more work needs to be done is not an admission of failure, but of a necessity to deepen and fill out something I think is already true. I think Dirk Jonkind gave the right answer in his little introduction to the THGNT for Crossway, which I reviewed for the Logos Bible Software blog a couple of years ago, when he said that the Jewish faith, they had a central location and central, religious figure, the high priest, and therefore they could have centralized control over their text. Now, even they didn't fully succeed in producing a perfectly pure text everywhere. We have these Catheve Curay readings, which I think are a massively unexplored aspect of this debate. My mind does run toward that evidence that I do feel that the TR/MT folks, of course, I believe in the Masoretic text too, don't adequately deal with. Anyway,
Yeah, if you're going to follow Michael Heiser's stuff, and if you're going to believe that the name of God is Jupiter, Yahweh, or you're going to reject Jehovah, which so many people were named after, Jehoshaphat, Jehoiakim, it's pretty obvious that there was a God called Jehovah because they're named after him. Anyway.
I'm satisfied with saying the theological reason that we have variance is that whereas the Jewish faith was centralized and had an authority figure, the Christian faith was not centralized, was indeed told to go disciple all the nations, and was not given a pope. Pace, my Roman Catholic friends out there, we don't have a centralized person or place where...
His Roman Catholic friends, because of, lexum and verbum, Roman Catholic heretics say that it's a little bit more accurate.
Variance can be corrected against a standard. So I'm satisfied with that. Second point, I would say, you said the theology there on the TR side of TR advocacy is ironed out. I know what you mean, and I could say, they've spent a lot of time on that, but I would say there's some major wrinkles. Let me just mention a few. One is Psalm 12, 6 and 7. My side has repeatedly said that's not a contextually sensitive reading of the psalm. It doesn't accord with the grammar. That is, the promise is, thou shalt keep them, O Lord. Does the them refer back to the poor or the words?
Well, in Hebrew, you usually go to the closest antecedent, and it's words. So I know there's debate about that, and even in-house debate, which is all healthy and good, and it's good to discuss those things. But at the end of the day, it's coming down to interpretation, and there's so many other verses that talk about the preservation of God's word. The grass withers, the flower fades, but the word of our God shall stand forever. It's pretty clear, that we're going to have the Bible for all generations. It says that in many other places. Jesus even said that we're going to be judged according to his words. I mean, how can we do that if we don't have his words? So.
Well, in Hebrew, there's grammatical gender, and although it's not a universal, typically you're expecting the grammatical gender of the pronoun to match that of the antecedent. And in this
Right.
case, you have to explain to me how the fact that the antecedent appears to be the poor, according to the grammatical gender, not the words, which is feminine, them is masculine, and thou shalt keep them. Take that together with the contextual reading and the reception history, which is something I'd like to do more work on, but I'm wondering.
So without reading this again, because I've read through this article quite a few times, go to KJV today and type in Psalm 12. Now, the KJV Today website, I don't think that's up yet. Something's happened to it, or their domain's lapsed or whatever, but it's still in Google Sites. So maybe if you type in sites.google.com and then you typed in KJV Today, one word, and then you typed in Psalm 12, it should come up there. And so I don't really want to deal with that issue today. I've dealt with it many times before.
Right.
I don't have
right.
any evidence for anybody in the history of the church who's come up with the same, interpretation of Psalm 12. I think there are major weaknesses.
That's because, see, what they do is they say, oh, Psalm 12 is talking about the King James Bible. Where does it say that in the Bible? It's like, no, Psalm 12, if the interpretation is correct, that the closest antecedent being words, that it's talking about God shall preserve his words from this generation forth and forever, that what he's saying is that the words will never be lost. And that's what we believe. We believe that the words were never lost. We have them today. We can have them in our hands. We can read them. We can build our bridge on those things that are taught there. We can have confidence in them. And that's what preservation is. And so, and it just so happens that that is in the King James Bible today in English. And so, yeah, I just can't see, what the problem is. And that has been, if I was, 500 years before the King James, we're around 1100. Well, it would be mostly in the Byzantine manuscripts, but if I had some of the Latin, and there wasn't a Great Wall of China between, Byzantium and Rome, you know what I mean? They were intermingling, and many times they were doing diglots of Latin and Greek, and they were comparing these things. And like I just showed you, some of these guys in Greek, they were having the comma, and sometimes it was in these places where it had Latin texts and things like that. So there was an influence there. But so there was the ability to study these things out to get to a good conclusion. And at times, because, if you're dealing with a translation like the Latin, you might have different words that have been used and it's been translated differently and things like that. So you have to look at that. But when it comes to the Greek, the Byzantine, if you're an expert in Greek, you can spot these solecisms. That's what someone like Eugenius Vulgaris did. And yeah, that's what the Reformation mostly did. That was very powerful, was they ironed out those issues that came about because of the natural thing that happens to all manuscripts. People make mistakes, and it's just like print errors. You're going to get them, and so, but you can iron them out and you can figure them out. It's not a huge mystery.
Is there. Matthew 5:18, I've already given this argument. Okay, if it's perfect, if you're going to use this to talk about textual preservation, every jot and tittle, you got to show me every jot and tittle. I'm still being told, well, we've got the every jot and tittle are all in the TR editions, and I made this argument in my paper. I'm like, brother.
So yeah, some people are saying that. The confessional guys are saying that. Scrivener, he basically said that as well. So he believed that Westcott and Hort commissioned him to do that. So they believe that as well. And that's pretty much exactly the same as my position. But it just comes down to the King James translators were the ones sitting around going, okay, so this, so we got the vast majority done. We got this 0.0001% of words here. It's about 20 different words. I think that we need to go with the Erasmus wording here. I think because of this and because of that, I think we need to go with this. And Chrysostom, he used this word here. Theodoret used this word. We looked at Cyprian. He quoted this. He did this, and so they're looking at all these issues, and they've only amended their TR from Bezel like a tiny little, like a speck of dust, and like compared to a mountain, like a speck of dust, and that's what these guys are focusing on. And at the end of the day, it's like, well, if the King James translators had printed a TR edition underlying their text, there wouldn't be any of these problems. But because they didn't, now we've got Mark Ward.
Others, that's exactly what the critical text side says. We just expand the...
Not exactly. You guys have texts. I mean, most of the time in the Nestle Allen 28, in the apparatus or Noted Bible Society text, you regulate sometimes 1,000 or 2,000 manuscripts to just BYZ, Byzantine, or an M for majority. Okay. So because they're cohesive, most of these manuscripts are cohesive. Okay. That means that, that they get along. They got basically the same readings. When you get the main pillars of the critical text, Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, Hoskier pointed out 3,000 differences just in the Gospels. And then you have to amalgamate and scrunch them together and say, oh, well, they're one now in the Westcott Nord text. And you've got all these errors that pop up, and it's like, oh no, it's a monster. So 1 minute they're going with one reading, next minute they're going with the other reading. It's just like they're all over the place with all these different readings, and it's like they created a never seen before text. And it is filled with solecisms, filled with grammatical errors. These are like, the King James doesn't have those errors in them. Their text is not accurate. Like I was saying about the mathematics text, it's got the wrong answers in it. That even historians and people involved in archaeology, and that they can see that the modern Bibles have these errors in them. But the King James doesn't have these errors. The Textus Receptus doesn't have these errors. And so, which one are we going to go with? The one that's wrong, and the one that's been created by Westcott and Hort and Unitarians, the one that has been preserved through guys like Metzger, who believe that the originals had mistakes, Carlo Martini, it's just a joke.
Allowable evidence pool. Why is it okay for you and not okay for us? And they'll say, well, you have way more variance. And I say, sure. But if Jesus is talking about perfect preservation, then there can be zero variance. And once you find one, Matthew 2:18, I want to say, some TRs say the wise men found baby Jesus, others say they saw him. That destroys the entire position.
Okay, so and that's one of the reasons why I've actually enjoyed going through, because I guess some people are happy with broad generalizations, and I know that can go into any field. Just say it's young Earth creationism. Some people will go right down to the microscopic level and they figure something out. Other people are just happy with, just broad generalizations, like I was saying. But when it comes to the Bible, like some confessional guys are happy with just sort of saying, God preserved his word and stuff like that. And like say Robert Truelove, and he's like, Revelation 16:5, I'm not really fussed about it. It can go either way. It doesn't really matter to me. And where my whole thing is, when these issues are brought up, these are things that I've been studying for years and years. And so I'm just going to quickly jump out of here. I'm going to go to Matthew chapter 2, and we're going to look just quickly at the saw him or found him. Okay, verse 11. And they saw the young child. Okay, so when it says check there, that means I've looked at the Bezer, I've examined that is exactly as Bezer says, because the Textus Receptus Bibles website that Keith Mason did, he only amended Scrivener's text according to the 190 list that he had, but there are other differences, capitalization, sometimes whole words I've found. And anyway, still a very good site, Textus Receptus Bibles. And so here we have, and when they come into the house, they saw the young child with his mother. Um, so Euron. Yeah, so here's an example of Edon has saw, and found here is Euron. So that's just a bit of information there. I perceived. Okay, so minuscule 2 has the reading Euron. Minuscule 474, Erasmus, he wrote about it. Theodore Beza has invenerant. And so what's interesting is if you go through this article, so it's on my website, textusreceptus.com, wiki, Matthew 2:11, you can see where the Complutensian polyglot, Erasmus, Stephanus, Beza, all translated Euron as invenerant. Okay? And so basically, Edon is translated as invenerant. So in Latin, these are actually synonyms. And so this is where it comes down to, I'm pretty sure it comes down to Stephanus. Oh, I haven't got Stephanus there. I was hoping to see it. But in his footnote, he has the reading, I think it's Edon there in his footnote. So anyway, I just thought I'd show you that page just so you can go and look at it yourself. That basically in Latin, they're synonymous. So it's basically exactly the same word. So then it just comes down to, which choice Scrivener used. And so, like I said, I go with the text, the underlying text of the King James translators that they didn't get around to printing. Scrivener's done his text. Now, if I find that the Amen in Ephesians is missing there, it was also in the 1611. It wasn't there, but it obviously that was a print thing. And so I just look at it and go, okay, Scrivener, yeah, he did a very good job, very, very, very good. It's the best we have of the Greek there, but if the King James translators had done it, it would be perfect. And I got no doubt about that because they were just men who went over and above, as we can see in the English version. And so if you read through my article there, you can get quite a lot of information, which will show you that it's really not a difference at all. It doesn't mean it's a synonym, and it just comes down to one Greek word that means invenerant or another Greek word that means invenerant. So both can mean saw. It's a non-translatable issue. So that Mark Ward's making out this huge thing, and as they chop out the last 12 verses of Mark, woman caught in adultery, the Comia, and placed out over 250 verses of the Bible.
If you're saying it's perfect, and if you're saying, well, it's not perfect, then you can't use Matthew 5:18.
Well, it's interesting with Matthew 5:18 because I've heard some TR advocates suggest that it doesn't matter because found, Evron, and saw, I forget what it is in Greek, is very similar. Yeah, there we go. Is essentially the same, and it means the same in the text. Like, how would you respond to something like that?
Then they're actually shifting over to my position, which is that preservation is God preserving the message and substantially preserving the wording. We don't have Bibles that say Jesus wasn't born of a virgin or Jesus wasn't actually.
It says the same thing in Latin, says the same thing in English. They're synonyms. And so it wouldn't take much for someone to go through and figure out exactly what was there. And so Scrivener, he's gone through and said, I think it's that. But he's pointed out that some other, I think it's the Complutensian readings, but the Complutensian sometimes did favour a translate into the Latin. And so, but in this case, it would have gone either way because it's invenerant. And so it's just a nothing. He's just arguing nothing. And then he's saying, oh, well, if you've got one tiny little dot out of place, then it's like, where's the virgin birth? Where's this? Where's that? It's like,
actually resurrected, and some Bibles that say the opposite. They're all giving the same message. That's what the critical text side has said all along. What the TR side has
it's not about the message. Jesus said he would preserve his words. Heaven and earth will pass away. My words shall by no means pass away. He said his words wouldn't pass away. So it's not, oh, my message or my doctrines. I mean, you could write the doctrines of Christianity on an A4 piece of paper. Shall we just scrap the rest of the Bible and say, oh, we've still got the Bible here? It's ridiculous. The words are going to be preserved.
said all along is we're going to give you all the words. We're going to give you every jot and tittle.
Right.
I like what Guri added too. Wouldn't that include the punctuation marks? And that matters, like in Ephesians chapter 1. What is perfect?
Well, the punctuation marks, I mean, in Greek, it was all in capitals and in the beginning, and they all were continuous flowing. And so, no, why are you making it like that? Well, the Greek of the Reformation era and the biblical Greek community have they have put these these marks. I've got the where are we? The Greek alphabet here, because oftentimes I'm getting the diacritical marks. It's a great place if you don't know where to get an iota subscript under a omicron with a acute symbol. You can go through the Greek alphabet Wikipedia and you can find all those there, which are really helpful. And some of the forms that they can appear in manuscripts and in printed editions. Anyway.
So I made it through 2 points. Okay, I've got my third point here. You say their theology is ironed out. I'm questioning that. The third point is, I hear and understand the evangelical conservative, which I am, the appeal that Van Cleek and Riddle and others in the confessional bibliology camp make toward, we need to put the Bible in the hands of the church and not in the academy. I get that impulse. There are times when I want liberal scholars to get their grubby hands off my Bible. It's offensive to see what they write about it. There are times when they help me too, okay? I'm not denying that by God's common grace, liberal scholars have good things.
So why aren't you doing a series against them? You know what I mean? Is it because you get paid to say what you do, and Lexham will drop you like a hot potato if you start biting the hand that feeds you? If you start talking against the Roman Catholic influence on the critical text, if you start talking against the Mormon who was working on the Hebrew text in the academy, or the influence of Bart Ehrman and his influence over the whole academy, or someone like Tommy Wasserman doesn't believe in hell, or Jennifer Knust, or 1,000 other things. The things that I brought up with Jennifer Knust, that's just like, oh, let's do a video on one of these heretics. It's like the who's who. Just pull out the roll and stuff. Yeah, that one. We'll talk about them today. There's so many that you could talk about, but Mark Ward doesn't want to bring them up. He just wants to attack people who are trusting in the words of God. And
things to say at times. So I understand where they're coming from on that, but they want to say, the church is fit to judge. And I'm saying, brothers, you gotta know Hebrew and Greek in order to make these judgments. And that's going to demand some kind of academy.
Okay. I will get King James Version TR Masoretic text people who are fluent in Hebrew and fluent in Greek, and I will debate Mark Ward. I will get them to debate Mark Ward. And I bet you that he doesn't go there, because most of these guys, when you say, they're like, I know Greek, like James White, then when it comes down to it, it's like they're like Google Translate, you know what I mean? That they don't speak Greek. They don't know Greek, and they can pass words. It's like a Sudoku game to them. But realistically, they're only using, the Greek that they have in articles. they couldn't just grab the New Testament off the shelf, read it, and explain it to you, or translate it for you. And so I challenged Mark Ward. I'll organise the debates if he wants to. I can get people who are fluent in Hebrew to ask him questions, maybe a debate on Psalm 12. Could talk about that.
You are graduates of the Academy. Van Cleek and Riddle are the lone that I'm aware of, legitimate PhDs, one from Liberty, one from University of, I forget where Riddle went to, somewhere in Virginia. Richmond? I can't remember. Anyway, this argument is going to necessarily ultimately take place among people who have the education necessary to have it, who can actually look at the evidence in Koine Greek. You don't have to go get a PhD to do that, but in general, sort of the exceptions even tend to prove the rule. They're the people who really put the time in to learn this stuff. It takes a long time, a lot of investment.
This is
Because Mark Ward is from that type of schooling, he just thinks that you have to have a PhD to say anything important. I mean, he's got a PhD, and I just have a 10-minute, 15-minute look through his website and go, wrong, 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 wrong. So to me, it's just like, well, I can't trust your scholarship. There are plenty of people out there with PhDs who don't know much. There are plenty of people out there who don't have any labels at the end of their name, and they know a lot. And the thing is, look, when you look at D.A. Waite, he's got a PhD. D.A. Waite, he learnt Greek. Even Ruckman knew Greek. I mean, he's just making out that King James TR people don't know Greek, and it's like, I mean, Stephen Anderson, I reckon Stephen Anderson would run rings around Mark Ward. Maybe I can, get them both in the same chat and they can talk about Greek, and Stephen Anderson, they can have a debate. I'm sure that Stephen Anderson could probably run a whole debate in Greek, introduce himself and say, okay, and ask the questions in Greek and everything. I wonder if Mark Ward would be at that standard. Or even if it was done in English, just, okay, what do you think about this word and how it's how would you translate this? What about this and that? And we could do the same in Hebrew. But yeah, he just seems to think that Jeff Riddle and Van Cleek are the only guys with a PhD. I mean, he just totally overlooks the Dean Burgon Society. It's like they're just rubbish. Just forget about them. It's like, I mean, even half of these Ruckmanites, they do learn Greek. And I know people in the Textus Receptus Academy, or even the confessional bibliology guys, they had a Greek contest. I think it was like 2 or 3 years ago. And we're all going through a Greek called Complete Greek. And so some of them made it to the end. I dropped out. I just found I didn't have time. And some of them made it right to the end, and they were like, "Where's our presents?" Because I think someone was promised like a Bible, like a 1550 or something like that. Or no, there were some prizes, and I think it was sort of like a bit reneged on, and I can't remember. But Chris Thomas was running it, and the level of scholarship, people were doing Duolingo and the what's it called? The Athanase one? I can't remember. But yeah, people were doing that. And then Stephen Anderson brought out his movie about going to Crete and talking Greek to people and witnessing and reading the Bible to them and how it's, sort of proving that it's not that much different. It's sort of like old, King James English to the English we use today. And it's not a huge difference if you're reading the Textus Receptus to them. And so anyway, let's continue.
something initially when I was talking with Dr. Van Cleek, I agreed with him because it sounded good. It sounded like it made sense to have the text in the hands of the church and all that. But I need time to digest and think about things. And as I thought about that, there's a couple things that kind of poked out in my own mind. One was the text of the TR is a product of the academic
Right.
society, right? Erasmus was the University of Rotterdam, and he learned everything he did there. He went went around in all different places and looked at manuscripts. It was kind of like a habit of his to collect manuscripts and to check them over and stuff. So in a sense, there's some textual criticism done there. You follow down the line, Stephanus, for example, the King James translators even, like these are all very learned and studied men. In Dr. Riddle's case, he suggested that, well, today's different. There's this postmodern philosophy, and so that's why we don't trust the academy today. But I'm not sure. I haven't had time to really think about that too much, but something like academia came from the church, essentially. So it would make sense that seeing academia as a ministry of the church altogether would be more congruent to that sort of thinking. And that, of course, that's not to say we trust everything that comes out of academia, right? We always, trust but verify. I think that's a famous president, I think, said that somewhere.
Sure.
I'm a Canadian, so I'm allowed to be ignorant on that kind of stuff. So,
but we trust God's word. God's word has authority over the academy. And so I'm a young earth creationist because I cannot in good conscience read Genesis 1 through 11 in any other way. I've tried.
That's right.
I'm not denying that there are true Christians, some of whom I respect greatly, like Vern Poitras, who read those passages differently. But in my conscience before the Lord, when Jesus asked me on that day, have you not read? I want to be able to say, yes, Lord, and I trusted you, even against what all the educated, well, not all, but, a great majority of the educated scientists in our day think that I'm part of some, cult for believing this. But I'm going to stick with God's word. So I'm accustomed. I'm ready to do that. The question is, do these passages really say what the TR folks are saying that they say?
Right.
And about the academy and the church, you look at a Peter Gurry and a John Meade. Why did they start the Text and Canon Institute? Why are they spending Saturdays away from their wives and children? I guess I'm not even sure. Is John Meade married? I think he is. I know Peter Gurry is. One of his sons is named Westcott, ironically enough, or very purposely. Why are they doing these events? It's because they love and serve the church. Why are they doing their scholarship? I was just reading. This is.
See, he's always saying that people on the critical text side have good motives. King James people sort of have bad motives, The thing is, I think what Elijah Hickson's doing, what Peter Gurry is doing, I think what these guys are doing is causing huge problems. And these guys are just basically sort of like, we're evangelicals. We believe in orthodox things like the Trinity and a few other things, and we're not liberals like these other guys. We understand they exist and they're out there, but we're good, solid Christians, and so they're putting on this sort of facade of Christianity, but they're dealing with a text that's come through Unitarians. It's come through this process, which is just it's a new text. It's a reconstructed text. It hasn't been used. It hasn't existed. It's never been seen before, this text. And when we talk about Erasmus made a few decisions here and there, you could have got a Muslim back in those days to get the Byzantine text and print it, and it would have been like a TR type. It would have been classified as a TR text. That's how much the Byzantine and the TR are close. They try to make out that the Textus Receptus is just so much different from the Byzantine text to the Textus Receptus. It's like, no. Have you compared the two? See, this is the thing. These guys are looking at tiny little specks of dirt and saying, look at this. And it's like, there's way more conformity between the Textus Receptus and the Byzantine text than these guys are making out. And if anyone just printed a Byzantine type text back in those days, it would have been considered a TR because there was nothing else. This is the thing. The only other alternative was the Roman Catholic Latin text, the Clementine Vulgate, and that was pretty much a TR text as well. Everything was TR until the Unitarians came along, and then because the Vaticanus was rejected, Sinaiticus was unknown, and then it's like, we've got these two, let's amalgamate them. Unitarians are involved. Westcott and Hort's there. All these verses are thrown in the bin and changed, and the deity of Christ has changed, and doctrines are changed, as George Van Smith, who worked on that project, wrote a book about that. And then we go through time, and other heretics are involved in it, and then it's sort of like the whole academy is almost like Bart Ehrman, and you know, do I have to repeat it over and over? I mean, it's just a mess. And then we got these guys, Hickson and Gurry, and I mean, have you ever talked to Hickson online? He is just, I mean, these guys are pretty toxic. And the thing is, if you go through my videos, I showed a video between Peter Gurry and Stephen Boyce. Now, if you go through that, I go through the examples that he gives, and he's actually defending the TR many times. He's saying, okay, this is probably a pretty good reading here. It's a TR reading, and it's like, hang on, isn't this guy a critical text guy? Well, why is he going with it? Because see, these guys don't care. It's like, it could be TR. If you want to read that, fine. If you want to read that New Living Translation, go for it. Hey, where's Michael Heiser? Maybe we can get the Book of Enoch. We won't say it's part of the canon, but we'll glean a whole bunch of stuff and believe in aliens having sex with women or demons, and the counsel of God. And, hang on, he's paid for by Lexham as well. It's like, it's just a mess. And so they're trying to look respectable with this Unitarian text. They're trying to squeeze in, the Granville Sharp rule, as if, Beza, Calvin, experts in Greek, as if they didn't know that.
Is going to seem a little random, but I assure you it's not. I was just reading Timothy S. Laniak's book, I think A Shepherd After My Own Heart. It's in the New Studies in Biblical Theology series. He is an academic, of course, and he's writing in a series that's run by D.A. Carson, and the whole first portion is all about biblical metaphor, and it is just gold. It was so helpful. I've done a lot of thinking about language in the Bible, and he was putting a bow on top of stuff, kind of crystallizing my thinking on stuff. It was so great. And then he's just done a ton of patient, careful homework in the Bible text, to explain the theme of shepherd, to pull that out of the Bible text and let you look at it throughout the whole canon, and then shepherds in the church to pastors. And I just over and over again thought, thank you, brother. You've done a major service. I've read all these passages, 100 times, some of them 1,000 times. Psalm 23 is one. And he's legitimately, with the scholarly tools that he's been given by the academy, the Evangelical Academy, he's pulling out things that are edifying me. He's serving me. That is what's true Christian scholars do. To say we need the text in the hands of the church and not the academy, what does that say about Gurry? He's part of the church.
Well, see, the thing is, what you guys have done is separated the academy from the church. So there's so many unbelievers in the academy. I mean, I was trying to remember his name. The guy who does the 1 John 5:7 book. Not Michael. Anyway, I was trying to remember it on another video. But so he doesn't believe in anything. He's an atheist. He grew up in the same town as I did in Melbourne, in Victoria. And he basically says that religion is dangerous, and especially fundamentalist religion. It's a danger. That's where, people get hurt and wars are started from it. He's including Christianity in that. And he's like part of the academy. He's hanging around with Hank de Jong and who's that other guy? Yeah, so those type of guys over in Munster. And so he gets paid to write books by these guys. So the issue is the academy at the moment is poisoned. When we were talking about a scholarly academy, we're talking about Christians, people who, like Tommy Wasserman doesn't believe in hell. So are you going to do anything about that, or is that just an embarrassing blight? It's like, oh, poor Tommy. We'll pray for him. We'll just be charitable to him. And it's like, well, how come he doesn't get rebuked? How come you're rebuking us as heretics? You're rebuking us and making out that, we can't do anything positive with our lives because we're just stuck on this King James thing. And it's like someone like Tommy Wasserman doesn't believe in hell. Someone like Jennifer Knorr, gay, lesbian teaching. Someone like Bart Ehrman can have influence in the academy. Anyway, I'm just going to go through some of the comments, and then I'm going to call it quits because I've been going on for hours and hours. Okay, so we've got quite a few comments here. And sorry this video went on for so long. It wasn't supposed to. Okay, so Dwayne Green said he was back. Word Magazine. So that'd be Jeff Riddle. Thanks for the shout out on Revelation 16:5, Nick. Yeah, I think it was a good time. I would be really. It would be really cool if you did a program on Revelation 16:5. I know you did about 5 of them, and I was like, oh, I got this idea from the KJV Today site, and so I know you started reading through his stuff, but where I got it from was like a little footnote, and that triggered a bunch of thoughts. It wasn't actually his whole article, and so that's where it's fizzed out. Where I sort of wish that yeah, you'd gone that route. But anyway, that was quite a long time ago now. Word Magazine, thanks for all you do. I never miss your podcasts. And we share all the Word Magazine podcasts on the Textus Receptus Academy on Facebook. Dwayne Green says, Nick says, I agree, love of truth is a given. Kept pure in all ages has, if sanctification determines the church's ability to discern authentic readings, then the modern church definitely stands disqualified. Yeah, that's a really good point. And that's the thing. All we have to do is just go through who is creating these Bibles, who is influencing this reading here, who is because we just hear of Munster, we hear of the Bible societies, we hear of this and that, but it's like who exactly, And when you start peeling back, um, the fabric, you start going behind the curtain. You're like, who's that guy? And it's like some atheist, some Mormon, some heretic. And I was completely unaware of Knost. It is truly appalling that someone the Bible tells us not even to eat with has a say in translation. I think the thing is, like, I've only mentioned Knost. I would say, where is it? I would say you can actually get this free online. If you go to David Cloud's, if you type in David Cloud and Unholy Hands or something like that PDF, you can download that on his website, and it just talks about like say translators of the NEB, I think it was, how they translated instead of they pierced my hands and my feet, they hacked off my hands and my feet and things like that, and how many of these people when they're questioned, how did you become a Christian? They're like, I refuse to answer that question, because they're not Christians, and so it is quite amazing to look at the influence that some of these people have had. That was the whole thing with Joseph Chambers and Virginia Mollenkott. He interviewed her. She's an open lesbian, and she was on the NIV translation committee, and so that's an interesting thing. The NRSV should be rejected entirely, and I have no issue saying that. But I guess the thing is, like, that's where I'm like, well, when we look at a lot of the Bibles that have come out, there's lots of heretics who are being involved in these Bibles, and I think we need to hold that same standard across the board. And I mean, I would never touch a NRSV only just to go through it to see what's wrong with it. I actually started to go. I had the New Testament, and I started to go through it. And there was so much wrong. I was just like, it's like the Good News Bible or something like that. It's got a whole new category of errors, and so Dwayne Green says these words are actually a critique of the confessional bibliology position. If you have a specific text, KJV or TR edition, the display of words discussion doesn't apply. Yeah, and I understand that, but I guess in a way, it's become a debate that's sort of only just between like Jeff Riddle, some of the reform guys around Jeff Riddle, uh, and the guys in the academy sort of thing. And this is something that I've held a few people to task on and said, well, I believe that we have all the words. Where some people like say Robert Truelovis are like, well, there could be a word here and there, and we don't know exactly what. I'm like, well, I think I can prove exactly where they all are. And I think the vast majority of people who are probably non-reformed would agree with me in that, in the circles that I'm in, like the Textus Receptus groups and things like that I run. Kept pure in all ages, confessional men believe the KJV is an independent variety of the TR. And so, so the whole quotation of that is by Hills, and so I've got that on my website. If you go to tr.org.au, you can go to my Textus Receptus website. You can see a picture of David Cloud's book where he quotes Hill. Probably the thing that he leaves out in the end, he says it's the underlying Greek text, and then he basically says in his book that is the I did have his book here. Here it is. King James Version defended by Hills. I'll just quickly read it. He said that is the text of Scrivener. So he says, namely the King James Version, or more precisely the Greek text underlying the King James Version. The next sentence says, this text was published in 1881 by the Cambridge University Press under the editorship of Dr. Scrivener, and there have been 8 reprints, the latest in 1949. Etc. It's printed by the Trinitarian Bible Society. So I agree with Hill's concept, but I believe it's the unprinted text that underlies the King James. The text that they never printed. Scrivener did it, 250 years later, and he did a very good job. And so there's only a few things I would tweak to get it to the point where it's like, yeah, the King James guys did that, sort of thing. But that's Hill's position. So I sort of grab Hill's position, but I don't necessarily grab the Scrivener bit on the end, even though I do say it is the best out there. And when we're talking about the differences, we are splitting hairs. Dwayne Green, kept pure in all ages. Some do, but I'm not sure if you can apply that to all confessional men. Okay, so that's in that position that kept pure in all ages wrote. Stephen Hayes wrote, as bad as Knust is, the bigger issue here is the so-called Christian scholars who yoke themselves with her in these Bible projects, the love of money. See, that's the thing. The doctrine of separation from heretics, separation from disobedient brothers even. It's just gone. It just doesn't exist anymore. And that's the thing, in the academy, there's people who are just heretics, and they're just hanging around. They're co-writing books with them, and they come and speak at their conferences, and it's like, it's basically just Bart Ehrman, but they're just ticking. Oh, we're still in the church. But Bart Ehrman's at least honest enough to go, I'm bailing. I'm going to go and make some money off this. So they love the errors being in it. It is not about being right, but about more deconstruction. Yeah, well, it seems that way. It seems that the standards are just getting lower and lower. I know that they went on about conjectural emendations for ages and ages. Then after I wrote my book, it's sort of like, there's really no conjectures in the King James Bible. They're all attested to by manuscripts. And that's pretty well proven. But there's conjectures in the NA28. So when we pointed that out to James White, he'd for years been harping on about conjectures, and people just make these readings up in their mind and everything, and then we turn the whole table around. Well, actually, we don't have conjectures. You do. And he's like, I'll go with the Tyndale House text because they don't have those conjectures. 2 Timothy 3:10. It's like, kept pure in all ages, clarification, confessional bibliologists who stand in the tradition of men like E.F. Hills, and then we've got a thumbs up from Dwayne Green on that one. If these guys are inerrantists, I'm a Martian. They are producing and promoting Bible versions that contain clear error. Valid call. My son just called Mark Ward the Polar Express kid. I'm not sure what that is. Of course, PhD doesn't automatically validate your position. It just seems like with Mark Ward that he is constantly harping on about scholars and scholarships, and he's benefiting from scholar. Like say someone like Michael Heiser. The more that I look at his stuff, the more I'm just cringing and going, like all my heretic alarm clocks are going, It's like, we've got this council of the 200, and it includes Thor, and it includes all these other gods from other cultures and Indian gods, and and they had a local flood, and they believe in evolution, and it's just sort of like just constant alarm bells ringing, and I'm just like, man, if this is the academy, this is a guy who's working for the same company as Mark Ward. This is what I'm getting at. Like if I was to do a show on Michael Heiser and show what he believes, a lot of people have no idea what he believes, but he's the go-to guru for, Stephen Boyce was just recommending his stuff. He's the go-to guru for these guys. He's the Hebrew expert. And so it's like, to me, he is heretical. Nearly everything he said, and nearly everything that comes out of his mouth is borderline heretical. It's like someone like Benny Hinn when you're listening to it, and or more so someone like from Bethel Church, Bill Johnson. Every time he says something, it's just like, oh no, is that heretical? And your mind sort of jumps upside down in your head. Peter Ruckman had a PhD from the same university as Mark Ward. See, that's the thing. It's like, the PhD. How come a PhD makes Mark Ward's friends all good, but it makes Ruckman evil? And knew far more about the Greek and manuscript evidence than Ward does. And I would have to say yes, even though I don't know that much about Ruckman. Over the years, I've just gone, okay, I'll watch one of his videos, and I'm like, he knows Greek and Hebrew quite well. And he's talking about all the different editions of TR editions and the King James and this reading and that reading and the Latin, and he might go off into a few, sort of chick tract style, conclusions and things like that. But it's like, man, this guy, he's not a dimwit. D.A. Way had two PhDs, one from Dallas Seminary and one from Purdue University. But Ward can only think of Riddle and Van Cleek. This is disingenuous. And this is the thing. It's like he's coming out like I'm the guy who's helped more people than anyone about reading the King James, and all this sort of stuff. And it's like, oh my gosh, who does this guy think he is? Does he know about Kirk DeVitro? Does he know about D.A. Waite and the Dean Burgon Society? And has he ever even looked into how many people have been involved in that and all the work that they've done and the PhDs that they have? And nearly all of them were like learning Greek and doing Bible translations and doing all sorts of things. And it was like, when I was listening to Ward, sort of just basically diss D.A. Waite, it's like, man, D.A. Waite's still alive. He's 90. So, it can be a little bit hard listening to him. But if you put him on double speed, he's still got it. Edward Hills had a PhD from Harvard in textual criticism. And that's the thing. If you go through the Credo course of Dan Wallace, he says, he only did that. It was disingenuous. He only did that course to get his foot into the academy so he'd spread his King James only concepts, And so when you listen to the other side, Wallace just demonizes anyone who has a TR position or anything like that. Even Burgon, who's more a majority text, he basically says he was a womanizer and, just an old fuddy-duddy who didn't want to move with the times and a very angry man and all this sort of stuff. And it's like, I hear that through Ward. He'll just say, I have problems with DA weight senior sort of thing. And it's like, okay, well, explain exactly what your problem is. Like, yeah, I've got problems with them too, but when it comes to this issue of the Bible and everything like that, it's like, well, what's your problem? What? Because he's a TR person. Um, Mark can't speak Hebrew or Greek, right? He just reads and quotes critics. Yeah, and that's a challenge. I challenge Mark to debate people who know the languages well. The Byzantine text and the TR are very conformative. I've never suggested otherwise. Yeah, and I guess yeah, a lot of this isn't against you, Dwayne. This is against Mark. So obviously we have a beef with him. But yeah, the Byzantine text and the TR are very, very similar, and that's why many times we appreciate the work by people like Maurice Robinson and even James Snap Jr. Because they'll defend TR readings and things like that. Mark Ward uses logos like most modern scholars who read Greek and Hebrew. Yeah, and that's the thing. He he wouldn't be able to pick up the Bible and just read it fluently, and so in Greek or Hebrew. The problem with Logos software is that Michael Heiser was the sole translators for the KJV. He's on record saying he has a disdain for the King James Version and names off the books he doesn't trust in it. Yeah, and that was with the debate that I just recently had with Rob Rowe. He quoted Heiser, and Heiser was sort of proudly saying that I coded all the words of the King James Version to the Hebrew numbering system and all this stuff. And I was like, man, I've done that on my website to the Greek, and seriously, it doesn't make you fluent in Greek. And so it's just like doing coding. All you have to do is just match each word to a corresponding number, and this had already been done. This was done. If you just go to Bible Online Bible, which is a good app to have. It's a bit like eSword, and it's on there as well. If you just go, like say, if I just enlarge in that so you can see it. If I just press the S, whoops, I pressed it too many times. There we go. If I press the S, all the Strong's numbers come up. And so all he would have had to do is just basically copy that, put it in its correct place, and just code it. And that's sort of what I've done. If I go to my website, Matthew 2:11, if I go up the top here, I've coded the Greek, I've coded the English, and then I've got my edition down the bottom, and that's coded as well. And so I can't see how that makes Michael Heiser a scholar by doing that. If he's a scholar, then I'm a scholar. It's like, but I just know it's going over words continuously and having, like, so I might just drop back to Matthew 1:1 because it's an example that I know that is tidy. If I go to Vivlos, I can go to, say, a page. I was actually working on this last night. Scriptures containing that Strong's number. So it'll be the word Vivlos or Vivlu or and so it's in English. The book, and so I've got an underline there, the book of the generation Jesus Christ. So these are all coded. Has the book of Moses written in the book of the words of Isaiah, the book of Psalms, book of the prophets. And so when you go through that helps in understanding how a word is translated. Sometimes it's plural, their books. And you get a bit of an understanding of that. And so that helps with understanding the Bible, but not really with understanding the Greek. And so if I go to Matthew 1 again, if I go to the bottom of the page, Scrivener's text. I've coded Scrivener's to all the Strongs. And so if we go to some random chapter, so red means that I haven't got a page on it yet. Blue means I've worked on a definition and I've started to do something there. So, but it's all coded. So the thing is, they would have already had the definitions and everything all there, and then they've just had to code it. So I've done it in the Greek and done it in the English. And so that's what Rob Rowe was saying makes Michael Heiser a Hebrew expert. Well, I guess I'm a Greek expert then because I've done that. But this is the type of poor scholarship that we're seeing. You just do a bit of coding and you're an expert. All right. Well, I think I'll bail. I've been waffling on long enough, and I'm going to go through part two. We might be flooded here in Australia. We've got a huge amount of rain that's come. And so I might even have tomorrow off. If I do, hopefully the power will be on. But if I do have a day off, I might do another video. If not, I'll probably just do this maybe through the week or maybe next weekend. God bless you guys. Thanks for watching. And yeah, have a look through some of my older videos. I just recommend you do that. I'll just jump onto my channel. If you want to know some of the things, I recently made one on the unicorn, where we've got the Comiohanium and Scrivener. We're examining debates. I've got lots and lots of info about Bible versions and issues, and interviewed a guy called Matthew Bashir. He's called the Bible Protector there. Comiohanium and Competency and Polyglot. Stephen Boyce and Peter Gurry going through their interview there. That's another one. I think that's part one. James White, David Pullman and his testimony in the King James. The wise men, were they wise men or fire worshipping occultists? Video on Jehovah or Jupiter. I highly recommend you watch that. And so yeah, Gerhard Kittel, he was a Nazi. Some heretics on the board of the National Alien United Bible Society. So I recommend anyone jump on there and have a good look through some of my videos. And so at the beginning, there's a few different types of videos, but most of it is to do with Textus Receptus, King James only stuff. Okay, guys, I'm going to bail. God bless you. Okay, so just before I go, you have a beef with him. I got that loud and clear. Yeah, and that's fine. He can sort of say that I'm, whatever, uncharitable, dishonest, don't do anything profitable to the church, like his academic friends or whatever. And it's just like, whatever. He doesn't know every King James TR person. I've met hundreds and hundreds of people. Some are good, some are bad. Just like young Earth creationists, you can't say they're all good, can't say they're all bad. It's slander. So anyway, it's a good thing you don't have beeves with him. For that would be unintelligible. A beef. Do you see Mark as a brother, or do you just strongly disagree with him? Or I don't think he's a Christian. Like, in all honesty, I'm not going to sit here and lie and say. I guess this is one of the things that I really wanted to say, and it's probably good that I've just hung back a little bit. There is a compromise within Christianity. People won't call a spade a spade. Saying someone is going to heaven, so, oh no, they're Christians, they're going to heaven, is just as much as a statement as saying, oh, they're going to hell, because you're saying where they're going with their eternal destiny. Jesus said you'll know them by their fruit. I just see poor fruit coming from Mark. I just see slander. I see half truths. I see poor scholarship. I see him getting paid to do all this is just a contradiction. His business that he works for, supporting people like Michael Heiser, supporting Bourbon, the Roman Catholic group. It's just like, to me, I know a lot of people say, oh, he's a brother, and even D.A. Wade. If you listen to him, he would say, oh, Mike Ward is a brother, and we're just praying for him. Where I would say, from my perspective, he's not a Christian. And so that's where I stand. And so when I first became a Christian, I used to read the New King James, and then I started to find holes in the New King James. And then I started to look at things that created different doctrine. And so even if someone was to do a basic study on, say, healing in the New King James, the word infirmities, which usually means weaknesses, and if it's applied to sicknesses, it means sickness. If it's a lot of the time, Paul is just saying, I'm weak, I've had this happen, so I'm weak, and so it's not talking about sicknesses. But when it starts talking about Paul having the thorn in the flesh, that chapter, they don't. The New King James usually has translated that as weakness, but then in that chapter it has infirmities, and that's because they're trying to squeeze that whole doctrine that Paul had sickness, and the thorn in his side was sickness that he prayed 3 times to get rid of, and so this is the thing, is in the New King James there's just subtle differences like that. In Hebrews chapter 3 verse 16, it says no one went into the promised land in the New King James. And so I actually did pull up my page here to have a quick look. So because Mark Ward is saying we need to just go to the New King James. We are silly Billy King James guys. Why don't we just wake up to ourselves? So on my article here, I've got direct quotes. From the beginning, who started it. And some of the criticisms, the underlying text, the bridge to Westcott and Hort. So Kurt DeVitro, he's made that claim, and there's been a book written about that by David Daniels. And so then we get back to the translators, James Price. David Cloud corresponded with the editor, and he said to me he's not committed to the received text, and that he supports the modern critical text in general. He's not a TR advocate. So he's saying he believed in the Nestle-Aland text. And so this is the main guy from the Old Testament, James Price. He actually created a whole web page against King James onlyists. And so he's very anti-King James, says it's filled with errors and all this sort of stuff. This is one of the main translators. Fasted. He's basically said that scholars agree that the science of New Testament criticism is in a state of flux. Very few scholars still favor the Textus Receptus. And so basically he's pushing for a majority text here, because Hodges and Fasted, they brought out the majority text not long after that. And so so we see that Fasted depreciates the Textus Receptus. New Testament textual criticism is in a state of flux, he tells us. The old is no longer good, he implies. Very few scholars still favor the old-fashioned Textus Receptus, which was once universally recognized by the church, etc., etc. So I've got criticisms of people involved. Dan Wallace said he was involved in the text. He said here, none of the translators, as far as I know, thought that the Textus Receptus was the closest text to the original. None of them. So 130 translators. And so what you have is many of the translators were just from other committees, the NASB, the NIV committee. They were just part of that. And then I go through the whole, the occult symbol, and I don't think it really matters. A lot of people have used that for the Trinity. It's but some people have seen the 666 in it, and it's like, okay. So I talk about that. Then it talks about the footnotes, and what they are and what they do. And then I go into some of the changes. Now, some of the changes are very small, but when you look, say, at this one, 2 Kings 23, verse 27, it says that the king went up against the king of Assyria in the King James. Here it says the king of Egypt went to the aid of the king of Assyria in the New King James. So clearly the New King James is false, and by its own admission here, via the parallel account in 2 Chronicles. The New King James itself says that the king of Egypt came up to fight against him. And so the King James is pretty much identical to it in that verse. So here we have 4 verses, but one of them is changed to the opposite meaning. Went to the aid or went up against. And so, and I asked questions like, why didn't any of the 130 translators notice this? And, these things have been pointed out to James Price by the guys from the Dean Burgon Society. They've done a lot of work on this. So here, Isaiah 9:3, thou hast multiplied the nation and not increased the joy. King James. And then New King James says, you have multiplied the nation and increased its joy. So one says not, and the other one doesn't say not. And so, that's an error there. It's at least it's different to the King James, at least, Here we have prophesy. Here it has do not prattle to them that they shall not take shame. So here it has prattle to you, they shall not return insult for insult. Anyway, it takes a bit to go through that, so I won't read that whole one. I just want to get some of the ones that are a little bit more. Okay, so here, Zechariah. For how great is his goodness and how great is his beauty. Here it has how great is their goodness, how great is their beauty. Generation is changed to genealogy. Because straight is the gate and narrow is the way that leads to life. Because narrow is the gate and difficult is the way that leads to life. New King James. Hell is changed to Hades. Worshipping him is changed to kneeling down. Hell to Hades again. Son to servant. He hath glorified his son Jesus. He hath glorified his servant Jesus. Again, the servant or holy child is changed to servant. Child is changed to servant. Happens quite a lot. Easter changed to Passover. I've gone through that. The preaching of the cross is to them foolishness, which to them who are saved is the power of God. And the message of the cross is foolishness. It's not the message of the cross that they think is foolish. It's the function of preaching that they think is foolish. So when we go preaching, they think that's foolish. So it's a different meaning there. To us who are being saved. And yes, you can get that out of the Greek, but it's a bit like saying the mother of God. It's like that carries baggage with it. It carries a whole bunch of issues. They omit, nevertheless I live. I am crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ lives in me. So nevertheless I live is omitted, completely gone. For verily he took not on him the nature of angels, but he took on him the seed of Abraham. For indeed he does not give aid to angels, but he does give aid to the seed of Abraham. It's totally changed. Here, Hebrews 3:16. For some, when they had heard, did provoke, howbeit not all that came out of Egypt by Moses. So some not all, like, provoked. There was Joshua and Caleb, okay? For who, having heard, rebelled? Indeed, was it not all who came out of Egypt, led by Moses? What, so everyone rebelled? Hebrews 10:14, that are sanctified, who are being sanctified, same sort of thing. Separate themselves and cause divisions. These be they who separate themselves, sensual, having not the Spirit. Instead, it has these essential persons who cause divisions. So that's why Mark was like, if you cause division, it's a sin. Where you got to understand, Jesus caused division. Jesus caused heaps of division. It would say that the scribes and Pharisees, they had division among them because of him. It says the people had a division because of him. And so he caused division wherever he went. And so just causing division is not the problem. You can cause division in a right way or in a wrong way. Here it has the righteousness of the saints, where the New King James has righteous acts of the saints. It's like works. Then I've got the hell thing, and then differences from the TR. Let your communication, so that's omitted. And it's hologos. Let your hologos be yea, yea, nay, nay. Let your communication be yea, yea, nay, nay. But here it has let your, doesn't have communication or hologos. Has let your yes be yes and your no, no. And so it adds that. And then instead of cometh of evil, which can come from us, it comes from the evil one. So the devil's involved there. Um, so that can come from our own hearts and not just Satan. A few other things. He that endures to the end, the same shall be saved. He that endures to the end shall be saved. So utos is gone. So it follows the NIV reading there. It departs from the Greek. It's got a Greek word there. I mean, why not go with it? Jesus spoke this parable unto them. New King James, Jesus used this illustration. So the Dice is gone. Nevertheless, I live is gone. The young women to be sober, that's omitted. Young women are just to love their husbands. So you can be drunk and love your husband. Jude 3, write to you of the common salvation, where here it has concerning our common salvation. So it's changed. And so some of the verses are changed into questions. So it has sleep on now and take your rest. Where in New King James says, are you still sleeping and resting? Search the scriptures, for in them you think you have eternal life. It turns into the question, you search the scriptures, for in them you think you have eternal life. And this whole verse 3:16 is just totally mashed up. So anyway, I thought I'd point that out, that about the New King James, because I wanted to go through that, because Ward's answer for us is to go to the New King James. Why aren't we going with the New King James? And that's only just a small amount. I mean, I've done a translation basically based on the TR, so I checked every verse with the New King James, and I found about 500 errors in the New King James, translational errors, issues that depart from the Textus Receptus, depart from the Hebrew, and in their preface, they admit that they go to the Targums, they go to the Dead Sea Scrolls, they go to other things. So I've got the preface here on my website, so you can check through that. But yeah, they go to the Septuagint. So anyway, I'll just see if there's any more questions. If not, I'm going to bail. Okay, thanks, guys. God bless.